Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yameen of Revolution. Trump and the U.S. military taps out. Iran too powerful. But before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, Iran has made Trump cry uncle, but Benjamin Netanyahu said, I got the files, and he's in America. Let's get right into the content. Salute.
Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has released a comprehensive list of the massive U.S. losses sustained during 15 days of fighting from July 8 to 21, 2026, during the Iran-U.S. Memorandum of Understanding, Tasnim news agency reported on Saturday. Brigadier General Hossein Mohammadi provided exclusive details on the damage inflicted by Iranian forces on the U.S. military throughout the region, resulting from the uncontrolled proliferation of weapons within U.S. bases in the countries. Iran adapted to Trump's bombing campaign. Missile response time was cut from 15 hours to 30 minutes, and within 30 minutes of an aggressive U.S. attack, Iran immediately launched missiles at U.S. bases. The report notes, first, radar and air defense systems, 7 command and control centers, 3 space communication systems, 6 Patriot air defense radars, 3 air and maritime surveillance and control radars, 8 early detection and warning radar systems, 7 air defense and missile radars, 3 EPS radar systems, 2 EPS-117 radars, 5 long-range radars, 2 air defense radars, and 1 tactical radar complex. Second, support and logistics facilities. 6 maintenance centers for fighter jets and helicopters, 3 support and logistics centers, 12 fuel storage tanks, 17 warehouses for weapons, spare parts, naval equipment, and aircraft components, and 6 missile storage warehouses. Third, operational infrastructure. 6 operational hangars for MQ-9 unmanned aircraft, 1 maintenance hangar for F-15 aircraft, 1 hangar for unmanned aircraft containing 8 brand new aircraft straight from the factory, 2 command centers, 1 refueling platform for aircraft carriers, 1 hangar for P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, 4 HIMARS missile launch platforms, 5 hangars for fighter jets, 4 Patriot air defense complexes, 6 missile launch platforms, 1 fuel pumping station, 2 signal communication centers, 1 intelligence data center, 1 facility for artificial intelligence and data processing associated with Amazon, 1 hangar for remotely controlled unmanned surface vessels, 1 fuel pier, 4 shelters for fighter jets, and 6 parking and operational aprons for aircraft. Fourth, aircraft and air assets. 11 fighter jets and helicopters destroyed or damaged on the ground, 17 unmanned reconnaissance and operational aircraft including 8 brand new aircraft straight from the factory, 1 F-15 fighter jet inside a shelter, 1 P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, 1 C-17 transport aircraft, 8 aerial refueling aircraft, 4 heavy helicopters, and 6 missiles in storage. Meanwhile, the casualty toll among U.S. troops has exceeded 600, including deaths and injuries. But, Pentagon data shows that more than 200 U.S. soldiers have been wounded since the U.S. resumed hostilities on Iran in July. The actual cost of the U.S. bombing campaign amounted to $37.5 billion spent on 11 days of airstrikes on Iran, an amount that could have built hundreds of schools, hospitals, and bridges across the United States. A spokesperson for the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said during a weekly press conference on Monday, occasionally concealing war crimes and taking pride in them is merely thrashing about in the humiliation they have created with their own hands, and been lured into by the Zionist regime. Naturally, they must pay the price. The US and Israel are stuck in the mud in Iran, despite their plans to win in a single day, said Esmail Baghai.
No, stop, no!
Iran continues to target American assets and American allied groups in the region despite the de-escalation coming from Donald Trump. Yesterday was reported that Donald Trump is giving space for peace talks between the American and Iranian sides. However, now there has been a revelation that it was actually the CENTCOM chief who urged Donald Trump to stop the attacks against Iran. What did he say? Is that the full picture? And does that mean that the United States is going to continue with this de-escalation? Let's listen to what the chief of CENTCOM had to say. The commander, who is at the top of the list in the United States in the Middle East or West Asia, recommended ending the bombing campaign around the Strait of Hormuz after concluding it reached the limits of its effectiveness. A recommendation that helped shape President Donald Trump's decision to pause strikes against Iran, according to a report. Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM, advised Pentagon leaders, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the White House last week that 2 weeks of sustained airstrikes had weakened Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping through the strategic waterway. Multiple sources familiar with the discussion said. His assessment, combined with advice from other senior military officials, influenced Trump's decision Friday to suspend strikes targeting Iranian positions along Iran's southern coast and around the Strait of Hormuz, which was, of course, the first de-escalation happening in 2 weeks. Is that the only reason? No, absolutely, it isn't the only reason. The United States suffered tremendous losses with its personnel. Reports of a CIA hub with 50 people was exploded, over 500 killed, according to Iranian numbers. That would mean potentially thousands wounded from the United States, let alone the huge failure and destruction of the American air defense systems, primarily the Patriot. And we've been talking about and revealing the scale of destruction the United States is facing, especially seeing as Iran's retaliation this time came much more intense than before. They were using hypersonic ballistic missiles, some of them weighing with a 1-ton warhead on the American bases. But from the CENTCOM's perspective, it would be possible for them to also have that advice, considering everything else, not because they weakened Iran. No, what he's not saying is that due to the losses and due to the reduced capability of the United States, because we can't protect our troops and anyone here, we have to stop. That's what Brad Cooper isn't saying. The reality is Iran hammered the United States completely in the past couple of weeks, and the United States had to stop. At least for some time. Okay. How long will that be? Well, that would depend on the outcome of the meeting, the expected meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. So far, this de-escalation is happening. And from an Iranian perspective, Iran isn't stopping. As a matter of fact, today it was reported that Iran targeted multiple locations in the Erbil governorate in the Iraqi Kurdistan part, as we can see in this video over here. Have a look at the smoke coming out from some of these bases. Separatist movements and movements allied with the United States of America. Reports of also attacks in Jordan as well. All of that with a continued escalation now, not only between Iran and the United States that Trump is now halting, but between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. This was an image following the Yemeni attacks on Aramco in Saudi Arabia. More attacks are coming from the Yemeni side now. As a matter of fact, today, the foreign ministry of Saudi Arabia, Saudi officials mentioned that there were attacks from Iraq on Saudi Arabia. So we're no longer talking about a Yemeni-Saudi escalation. We're talking about Saudi escalation with Iranian allied groups. They officially confirmed that there was an attack there. Yemen, from their perspective, they published more footage showing wreckage of the Royal Saudi Air Force Bayraktar UCAV, as we can see in this image over here. Completely destroyed it. And they're escalating even further now with their attacks. Smoke is still rising again from Aramco 2 days after the Yemeni attack. But now that Iraq is in the picture too, we're looking at a more regional escalation rather than just a confrontation between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. That directly hits Trump. That directly affects Trump. Anything that would damage the exports of Saudi oil from the Red Sea is very problematic for the United States, because that's the main secondary route from the Arab Peninsula and from the Persian Gulf that is now closed by Iran, and that the United States hasn't opened despite the de-escalation. So think about it this way. The purpose of the campaign was to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is open, right? Now they have a de-escalation, the Strait of Hormuz isn't open. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the United States is in a dire situation. It's in a humiliating situation. They have been hit so hard by Iran that they had to stop their operation without achieving even this one small objective of opening the Strait of Hormuz. And now they're facing a problem with Saudi Arabia, with participation from resistance groups in Iraq too. Combine that with the recent statement coming from Iran about a response against Ukraine. The Zelensky regime, the belly dancing Zionist rat, had an attack against an Iranian ship that he claimed had weapons and ammunition. Iran said it was at the behest of Netanyahu, at the request of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, in essence. And now we have an official statement from Ibrahim Azizi of Iran saying attacking Iran has never been and will never be without cost. America and the Zionist regime know this full well. Ukraine too will soon realize that the Islamic Republic of Iran does not leave debts unpaid. The list of defeated forces is getting longer. Yesterday, the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said that Zelensky is doing that for Netanyahu so that he can drag Europe into a direct confrontation with Iran. However, Iran is most likely going to respond to Ukraine too, simultaneously with this supposed de-escalation from the United States. So they're having this de-escalation, right? Space for talks, for peace talks. Trump wants peace talks. And their proxies are doing the dirty work. The belly dancing Zionist Zelensky, and they're facing problems now in the Red Sea as well. All of that tells us that there is no de-escalation. It's only a tactical move coming from the United States, because the objectives remain as they were before, taking down the Iranian establishment. They want to control Iran. That is the aim. the talks, the de-escalation, all of that is smokescreen. Iran knows that very well, but Iran has an approach where it operates strategically and on a long-term basis. And that's why they are still targeting, despite the American de-escalation, which most likely won't be lasting very long, because Donald Trump isn't achieving anything because of his breaches with the MOU. He isn't able to even open the Strait of Hormuz without trouble. And so far, and the longer he delays having a deal with Iran, the more concessions the United States has to make with Iran, and the more costly it will be for Trump to reach any deal with Iran in the future. This was an image following the Yemeni attacks on Aramco in Saudi Arabia. More attacks are coming from the Yemeni side now. As a matter of fact, today, the foreign ministry of Saudi Arabia, Saudi officials mentioned that there were attacks from Iraq on Saudi Arabia. So we're no longer talking about a Yemeni-Saudi escalation. We're talking about Saudi escalation with Iranian allied groups. They officially confirmed that there was an attack there. Yemen, from their perspective, they published more footage showing wreckage of the Royal Saudi Air Force Bayraktar UCAV, as we can see in this image over here. Completely destroyed it. And they're escalating even further now with their attacks. Smoke is still rising again from Aramco 2 days after the Yemeni attack. But now that Iraq is in the picture too, we're looking at a more regional escalation rather than just confrontation between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. That directly hits Trump. That directly affects Trump. Anything that would damage the exports of Saudi oil from the Red Sea is very problematic for the United States, because that's the main secondary route from the Arab Peninsula and from the Persian Gulf that is now closed by Iran, and that the United States hasn't opened despite the de-escalation. So think about it this way. The purpose of the campaign was to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is open, right? Now they have a de-escalation, the Strait of Hormuz isn't open. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the United States is in a dire situation. It's in a humiliating situation. They have been hit so hard by Iran that they had to stop their operation without achieving any, even this one small objective of opening the Strait of Hormuz. And now they're facing a problem with Saudi Arabia, with participation from resistance groups in Iraq too. Combine that with the recent statement coming from Iran about a response against Ukraine. The Zelensky regime, the belly dancing Zionist rat, had an attack against an Iranian ship that he claimed had weapons and ammunition. Iran said it was at the behest of Netanyahu, at the request of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, in essence. And now we have an official statement from Ibrahim Azizi of Iran saying attacking Iran has never been and will never be without cost. America and the Zionist regime know this full well. Ukraine too will soon realize that the Islamic Republic of Iran does not leave debts unpaid. The list of defeated forces is getting longer. Yesterday, the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said that Zelensky is doing that for Netanyahu so that he can drag Europe into a direct confrontation with Iran. However, Iran is most likely going to respond to Ukraine too, simultaneously with this supposed de-escalation from the United States. So they're having this de-escalation, right? Space for talks, for peace talks. Trump wants peace talks. And their proxies are doing the dirty work. The belly dancing Zionist Zelensky, and they're facing problems now in the Red Sea as well. All of that tells us that there is no de-escalation. It's only a tactical move coming from the United States, because the objectives remain as they were before, taking down the Iranian establishment. They want to control Iran. That is the aim. The talks, the de-escalation, all of that is smokescreen. Iran knows that very well, but Iran has an approach where it operates strategically and on a long-term basis. And that's why they are still targeting, despite the American de-escalation, which most likely won't be lasting very long, because Donald Trump isn't achieving anything because of his breaches with the MOU. He isn't able to even open the Strait of Hormuz without trouble. And so far, and the longer he delays having a deal with Iran, the more concessions the United States has to make with Iran, and the more costly it will be for Trump to reach any deal with Iran in the future.
Donald Trump is terrified of Xi Jinping, the leader of China. That's the real reason why Donald Trump backed off of his threats that he would do a massive escalation in the catastrophic and unlawful war against Iran. The public reasoning why Donald Trump did not escalate is perhaps equally humiliating and true, that the United States ran out of precision munitions such as the Patriot interceptors and THAAD interceptors, and Iran was able to successfully strike U.S. air bases with impunity in the nearby Arab nations after the United States escalated in the past few weeks. But that's only part of the story. The bigger part of the story is that China made it very clear through Wang Yi, the foreign minister, on behalf of Xi Jinping, that a massive escalation by the United States, as threatened by Donald Trump when he said he would open up the gates of hell, would bring China directly into the war. China had previously stated that it is a strategic ally with Iran. China previously called Iran its, quote, strategic partner militarily, economically, and politically. That was never being hidden. And we knew that China was supplying logistical support and weapons to Iran, and Iran was providing weapons to China, training to China on drone warfare, and Iran was, of course, providing its Shahid drones to Russia as well. And China's been working closely with Russia to develop China's military capabilities, given Russia's active war against the Ukraine and the lessons that are being learned and how modern warfare is fought. But China made it very clear to Donald Trump, to Marco Rubio, and to others in the despicable Trump regime that if Donald Trump opened up the gates of hell and started to strike bridges and power plants as Trump threatened, China would immediately get involved and it would trigger World War III. I talked about this weekend how Donald Trump is terrified of starting World War III, and especially given the fact that the United States has run out of its munitions, specifically its precision munitions like the Patriots and the THAADs. If China were to get involved and the United States has depleted, like 80% of some of its interceptors, the United States would very quickly find itself defeated in a massive world war. You add to the fact, and you can see what's going on in the background, that after in Ukraine, Zelensky struck an Iranian ship in the Caspian Sea, Iran made it clear that it would go and strike Ukraine potentially, and more publicly. And we know that Iran is providing the Shahid drones to Russia that's being used against Ukraine, but to formally now link the two wars into one massive world war is what Iran was threatening, China was threatening, Russia was threatening, and that was one of the main reasons that Donald Trump backed down. You got to pay attention, and this is why we cover this meticulously here about what's been taking place in the past 48 hours. Of course, Iran's foreign minister, Araghchi, had a meeting with the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. This is where lots of the BRICS bloc nations send their foreign ministers. And on the sidelines, you saw right here, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi meeting with Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi. Now, over the past 24 to 48 hours, what else has been posted publicly? Well, a senior source told Al Arabiya that China, in coordination with Pakistan, is conducting, quote, diplomatic contacts aimed at reducing tensions between the United States and Iran. According to the source, Beijing is exploring reciprocal confidence building measures and seeking to prepare the ground for U.S.-Iran talks on regional security. China also wants Gulf states and other regional powers involved in supporting a framework for long-term stability. If confirmed, this suggests an increasingly coordinated China-Pakistan diplomatic track, with Islamabad acting as a regional facilitator and Beijing providing the broader political umbrella. That's diplomatic lingo, broader political umbrella. Umbrella. What does the word umbrella mean here? Security umbrella. Where the umbrella used to be centered, United States. The Mideast had a U.S.-centric security umbrella. Now, what is changing is that it is a China-centric security umbrella. So Pakistan is there as a mediator representing regional powers. Pakistan has a defense agreement with Saudi Arabia. There's also one now moving closer with Kuwait. You have the Gulf cooperation countries that are all there. And so you have Pakistan serving as basically the good cop, if you will, good cop, bad cop, and China coming in and basically saying, we now are the security umbrella in the Middle East, not the United States. And there's a new regional framework that's going to be taking place as Donald Trump showed how weak and pathetic he is and how he's destroyed the U.S. security umbrella in the region. So that's what was going on. Now, China made it clear to Trump. Also, Russia did as well through Lavrov. And remember also what was happening over the past few days. So, and this is all coordinated together. Shanghai Cooperation Organization meets. Who else meets? Rubio then has a meeting with Wang Yi, and Rubio has a meeting with Lavrov. Wang Yi of China, Lavrov of Russia. They both delivered that message to Rubio as well. That's why when Rubio left the meeting, he was a deer in headlights, right? It looked like he was going to cry because he was told, World War is going to start, bud, and you're out of munitions. We see through the satellite images how bad your bases have been destroyed. There's a reason that you have all ordered in the United States, U.S. companies to not produce or provide satellite footage, and you've ordered the European Union not to provide satellite footage. China is now going to be running the show in the Middle East. That's what was conveyed. That's why you had this blabbering, slobbering, pathetic looking, he always looks pathetic, Rubio, all Don't do the Lego videos. The Lego videos of me are so mean. The Lego videos are mean. Okay, so that's what was going on. Look, Iran and China taking photos together. The Iran and China embassy account posting about the meeting between Foreign Minister Araghchi and Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, right there. Now, Barack Ravid, Trump's personal stenographer over at Axios, posted, the top U.S. military commander in the Middle East, Brad Cooper, recommended stopping the bombing campaign around the Strait of Hormuz because it reached the limit of its effectiveness. We have doubts that resuming large-scale military operations will push Iran back to the negotiating table, and depleting our stock of interceptor missiles is one of the factors that makes returning to large-scale military operations a risky option. What do you think that Wang Yi from China was conveying? What do you think that conversation was like? We know you're out of munitions. You hit a power plant there. What are you going to hit? The Bushehr power plant, which Russia built by the Strait of Hormuz? Do it. We dare you to do it. We will go in, China and Russia on the side of Iran. Good luck. You don't have weapons. You do not want the smoke right now. And Donald Trump backed down. Donald Trump rejected I reject the reports that we're running low on munitions. We have far more munitions than anyone in the world, Donald Trump says. That's the biggest tell that he's lying, because he's opening up his mouth. That's what he told the Wall Street Journal. We have far more munitions than anyone in the world, and far more than we need. What does that mean, you have far more than we need? No, you don't. You are the most pathetic liar that there is. IRGC's General Ramazan Sharif said, we defeated the U.S. We defeated them militarily, politically, economically, and in the cultural fields. The U.S. failed to achieve any of its sinister goals. Also, in the past 24 hours, Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi spoke with Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov. All of this is being delicately coordinated. And look, even General Mike Flynn, you don't get much more MAGA than General Mike Flynn. I can't believe that I'm going to utter these words right now. I agree with him on this point. I'm saying, listen to what he says right here. He's referring to these warmongers on state regime media Fox saying, Donald, you got to invade right now. You got to annihilate Iran, invade Keshem Island. Here's what Flynn says. This gentleman, referring to one of the warmongers on Fox, has no idea what he's talking about, nor how monumentally challenging an all-out war against an alliance of Iran, China, Russia, Pakistan, North Korea, all nuclear-armed nations, and other loosely aligned nations and ideologies would be. Trump, this is what Flynn's saying to Trump. I know you are influenced by what you see on Fox News. Please tread carefully with statements that this man, who seems to be a friend of yours, referring to the Fox host, was what he's making. He is asking the nation to go to war against Iran when the majority of people in your base and the country want nothing to do with this. Take a look at this assessment right here by one analyst in the region. He says, America's failure to reduce Iran to a vassal, as it said it would, accelerates the BRICS. That's the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That's the BRICS bloc, which is the challenge to NATO. It accelerates the BRICS realignment and seals China's role as the principal development partner across Southwest Asia. The Gulf states, the Arab nations, are already pivoting toward infrastructure and production-based cooperation with Beijing and Moscow. The Middle East is being absorbed into Greater Asia, while the transatlantic system is left isolated. This is the Eurasian Development Order asserting itself against the collapsing imperial order. First of all, it's strengthening BRICS because they see a weakening America. If America has failed to subordinate Iran and reduce it to a vassal, then it will not succeed with either Russia or China. Those states will take strong encouragement from Iran winning the war, and it will increase China's insistence on a close relationship with Iran to secure its oil supply. China is moving fast. It sees a great threat from America, not the same threat that Iran is under, but a threat to undermine its economic growth and its economy in the interest of stimulating the American economy. But it is not going to capitulate either. It is not much of a competition in the Middle East. Everyone welcomes China to the Middle East. Do not be under any illusions. Even the Gulf states will all be seeking a bigger, bolder relationship now with China and Russia. That is quite clear.
As you know, I've been using Hexclad for a while now, and I've been obsessed with it. I love grilling in the summer, but once you move beyond burgers and steaks, that's when things usually get.
China policy expert and Beijing lawyer Victor Gao said the following on the war. Here, play this clip.
How would you advise GCC countries to navigate the current conflict as it presages a new geopolitical framework, as you've outlined?
Well, I pride my relations with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as well as with many other Middle Eastern countries. I have several points to offer as advice. First of all, when China was involved with Iran and Saudi Arabia, they shook hands. They ended their decades, if not hundreds of years, of hostility against each other. When the United States and Israel get involved between Iran and Saudi Arabia, they fire a shot at each other. They became hostile again. So I hope Iran, on the one hand, Saudi Arabia and all the other Middle Eastern Arab countries, on the other hand, will know that when China is involved, you get peace. When the United States, Israel get involved, you will get hostility, war, confrontation, destruction. So the choice is very obvious. I hope all my friends, highly regarded by me in Saudi Arabia, will listen to me, treat China as a major source of defending free trade. And I hope when the dust ends for this war of aggression against Iran, the Iranians and the Arabs will shake hands again, preferably with Chinese intervention and mediation, and they may cement their friendship and cooperation for decades and centuries to come, because it will be suicidal for the Arabs who believe in Muslim, although they believe in, many of them believe in Sunni Muslim, and the Iranians who are Muslims, even though they believe in Shiite version of Muslim, get at each other's jugular. It will be much better if they can recognize each other, respect each other, shake each other's hand, and engage in cooperation with each other, rather than, as some other countries are leading them in the wrong direction, being hostile with each other, trying to destroy each other, get to each other's jugular. That will not be the better Muslim world at large.
And then you had Lavrov issue the following statement recently. If in Washington, they say Russia and China supply weapons to Iran, the ones that are used to attack American facilities, this fiction is embarrassing. U.S. supplies weapons to Ukraine, so they are a direct participant in Ukraine attacks against facilities and sites in Russia. Now, back on April 23rd, 2026, Trump was asked, are you angry at China for them sending stuff to Iran? Because it was always known that China's sending weapons and logistics to Iran. And back then, Trump was like, no, we do the same thing. We do the same thing. Here, play this clip.
Are you angry at China for what they sent to Iran?
No.
So there's some reporting today.
No. I guess we do the same thing, don't we? With other countries. You know, it's like one of those things, but nothing that it wasn't earth shaking. Yeah.
So then the big tell was on Friday, Trump was asked, wait, you said Russia and China aren't helping Iran, but Hegseth says they're enabling. What's the difference? And Trump says, I don't know that they're enabling. Well, Trump in April 23rd, 2026 said they were enabling, which lets you know that at that press conference, Trump was told, and he knew that not only is China enabling, but China made it very clear. Here's the red line, Donald. You further escalate beyond these attacks that you're doing on Bandar Abbas and the coastline. You do any type of invasion, we get involved. Here's what Trump said then. Play this clip.
And you said today that Russia and China are not helping. Earlier this week, the War Secretary Hegseth said that they are enabling. So what is the difference?
Well, I don't know that they're enabling. I mean, I will tell you that President Xi said he will not partake, and President Putin said the same thing. I think, I trust them. They've had a long-term relationship. There could be some things they do, but thus far, at least, it has not been major. I don't think they want to have me disappointed.
And notably, Netanyahu terrified of China. In a recent interview, Netanyahu was saying China gave Iran missiles for manufacturing components, to which a reporter said, "Does that disturb you?" Netanyahu said, "I don't like it." The reporter said, "So should China reconsider?" To which Netanyahu said, "China should think about, could be, I don't want to speak for China." Notice how Netanyahu said, I don't want the smoke with China either right now, which is notable. So what's Donald Trump doing right now where he knows that he's been checkmated by Xi Jinping? Well, that's why over the weekend you saw when he did those 100 AI posts of like weird AI images like strike on Karg. And he does this like weird fake image of AI planes attacking Karg Island, or Trump being a pirate saying, "It's our oil tanker now, our give the enemy nightmares," or Guardians of the World. Trump did this weird AI image of himself over U.S. Fighter jets blowing up Iran. And Trump says, "Guardians of the World," because he knows he destroyed the U.S. security umbrella. That's the reality of what's going on there. Iran's parliament leader, MB Ghalibaf, said the following: Khomeini's blood will be avenged by liberating Jerusalem. Iran will never allow IAEA access to bomb nuclear sites. We must build a true strategic partnership with China. Or this: Iran will offer China favorable rates for Hormuz. Tehran plans to grant China preferential treatment and preferential rates right there. How about the fact that China's the vice chairman of the National People's Congress of China was at Khomeini's funeral? How about this? China directly rejected Donald Trump's latest claim on Truth Social that Xi Jinping told him that China would not sell weapons under any circumstance. Iran said, "We have a comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran, and China strongly supports Iran in safeguarding its sovereignty." All very notable indeed. Oh, how about finally this? Remember Donald Trump bragging when he met with Xi Jinping, and he let Xi Jinping talk about the Thucydides trap and how the United States is weak compared to China. And Donald Trump's like, "Yeah, we are weak, but Xi, aren't I hot? Don't I make us look a little more hot?" And Xi Jinping's like, "Okay, man, okay." Pathetic. I mean, there's like the most pathetic international trip. Seriously, right? Donald Trump's done a lot of pathetic trips, the G7, the NATO summit, but the China trip with Xi Jinping talking about Thucydides trap, and Trump's like, yeah. Well, Thucydides, huh? Right. The most embarrassing presidential visit ever. He kissed the ring. Trump bowed down to Xi Jinping. But the one thing that they got nothing out of it, but Trump's like, Xi Jinping promised he was going to buy Boeing jets, right? But Xi Jinping was going to buy like 1/4 of the Boeing jets that were promised previously. You know, that's like Donald Trump, like, "Yeah, we got out 10% of the ships from the Strait of Hormuz than before the war. Victory. China's buying 25% the amount of soybeans than they were under Biden. 25% the amount. Yeah, we did it." Okay, that's worse. You want more, not less, you idiot, Donald. But how about this? The Boeing deal with China falling apart. They're having a hard time with it, said one of the people familiar with U.S. thinking on the talks. China's demand for parts and service guarantees to avoid the impact of possible future U.S. export restrictions has stymied the purchase agreement. Falling apart, Trump's Boeing deal has turbulence in Beijing. Exactly. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers.
Where is the war in Iran going? Are we getting closer to a negotiated settlement, or are we getting closer to going in even bigger, back into all-out war? Or are we on the verge of the war expanding in scope even? All of these things are in the mix here. All these things are possible. And frankly, none of them seem to be heading in a good direction. But we're here unintimidated, uncompromised to give you the truth, no matter what it is. And with us back today, we have Trita Parsi, who is the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute. And you see some of his social platforms handy yours right there. Trita, welcome to the show. But man, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. So I want to just jump right into it. Over the weekend, Mike Waltz was asked, hey, you know, we were supposed to be first of all, maybe 4 or 5 days. And then President Trump said, well, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And then that turned into 40 days. And then the blockade and then the MOU. And now we don't really even know where we are. So he was asked, Mike Waltz did, are we going to keep going on even to the end of the year?
Will this war be over by the new year?
Well, first, this war has been going on for 47 years. These attacks on Americans,
not in this,
of course, not necessarily this intensity, but at some level, Iran has been at war with the United States. Heck, I was just looking at old video of under the Obama and then the Biden administration when they had, and the Obama administration when they had sailors on their knees when they seized one of our boats and captured them.
Okay, so he, again, like he did, he was also on Fox News this weekend, literally answered no question that he was asked and had his idea what he already wanted to convey. But let's start off with this issue that we've been at war with Iran for 47 years, or they've been at war with us. What do you say?
Well, it's kind of funny because on the one hand, apparently we've been at war for 47 years, but this new round is a completely new war. So it doesn't require any new authorization from Congress and the clock is reset. So the 60-day reporting or authorization period is no longer valid. So, I mean, the warmongers within the administration, and I think it's important to note that not everyone in the administration is in favor of this, they cannot have it both ways. On the one hand, claiming that we've been at war for 47 years, and on the other hand, claim that this is a completely new war, and as a result, whatever votes have taken place, etc., are no longer valid, and everything starts afresh. The idea that we have been at war for 47 years is also ridiculous in many different ways. Yes, the two countries have defined each other as enemies. They've had tensions, but there are nuances, there are grays, there's a spectrum. You can be at odds. You can have a conflict that's different from being at war. If you view everything as war, then we are always at war. And perhaps that is their desire. Perhaps this is a way of making sure that forever wars are completely normalized.
Yeah, they have been normalized, unfortunately. And we need people like you at Quincy Institute to try and shred that fantasy there, that perverted fantasy, I guess. But in terms of whether this one, whatever may have happened for 47 years, we have what we have right now. The question is this going to go to the end of the year? Which he didn't answer. He didn't answer that at all. And then on Fox News, he was asked, there's also been some information out in the media, especially this last weekend, that we thought we were about on the verge of launching a new all-out war, going right back into what we did in the first 40 days. That didn't happen. So she asked him, is it coming?
Wall Street Journal says if he wants to win this war, Mr. Trump must deliver crippling blows to Iran's government. That means rejecting proportionality. It means expanding targets to include highways, bridges, factories, and other infrastructure that sustains the IRGC war machine, not one a day, but all at once. Is that coming?
Well, remember, the IRGC controls 40 to 50% of the Iranian economy. What you've seen in the last 13 days are strikes particularly focused on Iran's terrorist activities attacking civilian shipping, ships from Singapore, Cyprus, all over the world that have done nothing to Iran. That's been condemned in the United Nations. You hear a lot about our allies and countries not being with us. A record 146 have stood with us in condemning those activities. Shannon, you have to ask yourself, is a country winning that has little speedboats running around? I mean, these are like the Somali pirates with cruise missiles and drones. These are acts of desperation. The Iranian regime is isolated, economically devastated, militarily devastated. And I appreciated the clip that you just played talking about the suffering that is going on internally. Inflation is spiking, the currency is tanking, foreign currency reserves are gone, and we're starting to see the Iranian government even not be able to pay its own workers and even its own military.
Okay, so aside from, again, he didn't answer the question, are we going to go back into a full-scale war? Are you going to try to finish the job? He goes in this long screed here. And one of the things that I found comical, but also embarrassing, that, these guys are just little guys with Somali pirates with cruise missiles. They can't do anything. And yet, when you look, here's the reality here. Over the last 7 days, only 9 liquid tankers have sailed past the Persian Gulf between July 18th and the 24th. And you see down there on the bottom, Strait of Hormuz average only 1.3 outbound tankers, not barrels, but tankers per day, compared with about 4.3 during the rest of the war. So when there was a war going on, the average was about 4.3. And now since we've had this, I don't know, we started with the MOU, and now that we went back to this 13 straight days, or we had 13 straight days, there's only been 1.3. So we're in control of nothing. Those little Somali pirates seem to be pretty effective.
I mean, look, it appears that the appearance of winning is more important than the actual winning. So just throwing out a bunch of meaningless statistics about how many targets you have struck or how much you're suffering economically, all of these different things to give the appearance that the U.S. is winning this war, that the administration knows what it's doing. This is what you cling on when you actually can't cling on to something real. And I think it's really sad because, what is stunning to me is that the war was started in the first place. Now, at the time, Trump had this view that this is going to take 4 days, and the Iranian government looked weak because of the protests and other things. It was a massive miscalculation. It ended up becoming a devastating loss in many different ways. But then, without having changed any of the parameters, without having a new strategy, without having any new intelligence, any new tactics, he then restarts the war and expects a different result. And now, after 13 days, stops shooting. There's no formal ceasefire. It's not clear whether this de facto ceasefire will actually work, because it will be contingent upon an agreement on the strait, not just an agreement for a ceasefire. But having done this then leads you to a scenario in which all you want to say is that, look how much damage we have inflicted on the other side. Look how much, they're just pirates, etc., in order to give the appearance of winning, when reality is quite the opposite.
And so then the question is, where are we going to go from here? Because everything is closed right now. And the 13 days came to an end. It didn't accomplish anything. And we didn't do anything over the weekend. Where are we going? What is your best understanding of what the administration, what are they even planning on doing next?
I don't think there is a plan. I mean, this is the thing that has been stunning. I think we all expected, okay, there's got to be some sort of a new plan, right? You wouldn't just start a war like this, but apparently that's what they did. We're expecting, the more it looks odd and achieves nothing, the more we start thinking, are they playing like 7-dimension chess? Is the complexity and brilliance of this so immense that we are missing it? Or is it that actually there is no plan, and that just haphazardly have been bombing places, even the bridges, etc.? Many of them that they have struck are seasonal bridges. It means that they're bridges that are used for specific moments when there actually is water in the flood, but in the river. But for most of the year, there is no water in the river. They're dry rivers. So you're destroying a bridge that actually doesn't serve much of a purpose.
Yeah, I remember there was right after that, right after we hit one of those bridges here a week or so ago, then there's video of the trucks just driving around.
Yeah, just driving. Exactly. So what's the point of all of this? Now, there could be an effort in which perhaps this was aimed at paving the ground for a ground invasion. You would know much more about that than I do. But it doesn't seem like that was the case or that it was successful. There's speculation as to perhaps he was preparing to do, attack on one of the nuclear sites, etc. But I think something else in between happened that caused the administration to realize faster than they otherwise would have that this is not going to go down well and it's going to be costlier than the first round of the war. And that is what happened in Jordan. Because what happened in Jordan is not just that the Iranians struck an American base with significant precision and got through the air defense systems. We knew that they could do that. It's that the Iranians appear to have had real-time intelligence of what was going on in that base. Because something was happening there that the Iranians found out very quickly, and then within 7 minutes, they struck. Which is very different from what we saw in the first round of the war, in which they had better intelligence, but it seems like essentially they were buying commercial satellite images from Chinese or other outlets that had higher resolution, but it was still 5 to 10 days old. Now we're talking about them having live intelligence. That changes the picture dramatically when it comes to force protection. And you combine that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And it, combined with depletion of interceptors, etc., it created a really bad situation. So even this non-planned plan no longer could go forward, and the administration started to become somewhat desperate for some sort of a ceasefire.
Well, yeah, and I think that's exactly what you're seeing here. I mean, this is what I popped up there a second ago, where Vice President Vance and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kane raised concerns about the fact that if we went in with this heavy strike over this past weekend, that we didn't have enough ammunition to continue going on, and it wouldn't make any difference anyway. It wouldn't accomplish the objective, which is to release the Strait of Hormuz, but it would continue to deplete. And then at the same time, we have this information out here that shows some of the targets that have been hit, some of which you mentioned there in Jordan. But you see that these imagery, despite the fact the U.S. is trying to tell civilian people not to give these satellite imageries, some of them are getting out anyway, and you see they have very pinpoint strikes. When they shoot at something, they hit it. Whether there's any interceptions or not doesn't make any difference. They're hitting what they're shooting at. What does that tell you about the capabilities after all of this time, all this war since the 28th of February to today? What does this tell you about the military capacity of Iran right now?
I would take it even further back to June of 2025. I think what we have seen is the manner in which the Iranians are learning and improving is decisively faster than the manner that the US or Israel has been learning and improving. Perhaps, the starting points of the Iranians were so low so that, catching up wasn't as difficult. I don't know, you know much more about these different things. But I think, again, one of the key things that happened here is that it was a revelation that not just do they have better missiles, not only can they go through all the air defense systems, now they also have intelligence that is essentially real time, which means that whatever the US is doing in the region, presumably the Iranians know about it almost right away. That's a very, very different picture.
Yeah, it is. And that's just something that we have not had to deal with. We have not, whether it was the insurgency in Iraq, the 2003 on war and all the years that we fought that, or the Taliban and the 20 years of the pointless war in Afghanistan, et cetera, they really couldn't do anything other than plant bombs and have strikes here and there where they hit somebody as an ambush or whatever. They couldn't do anything here. This is the first time where somebody has the wherewithal and the ability to hit back. And now then, as you just pointed out, they're expanding their capability, and the threat to our forces in the region is continuing to grow. But let's take a look also at one other thing here, that this war not only has been going in a south way, but something you and I were talking about just before we came on the air here, it may also be expanding in scope. As here recently, Ukraine, this came out of nowhere for a lot of people. I wonder if you can speak a little bit about this, because Ukraine struck an Iranian vessel, and according to Abbas Araghchi, also killed some of their sailors. And he says this cannot go unanswered. What do you make of this development?
So we know, of course, that the Iranians have been helping the Russians with drones and other things in Ukraine. Nevertheless, the idea that the Ukrainians would strike at the Caspian Sea, at Iranian vessels, on the surface could look as if the Ukrainians are trying to showcase their capability. They're trying to exact the cost onto the Iranians for their support to Russia. They're trying to perhaps show themselves to be somewhat useful to the US. I suspect that there's something bigger going on, because all of those things in and of themselves may be beneficial to the Ukrainians. But if we go back and think of what one of its key objectives has been since the Russians invaded that country, is that they try to make sure that NATO enters into the war fully, that the US enters the war fully. Which, of course, if you're sitting in Ukraine, that makes sense. You've just been invaded by a major nuclear power. You're fighting back, but it would be much more helpful to you if another superpower entered into that war in your support rather than just providing weapons, etc. But that was an attempt to essentially get the US to do Ukraine a favor. And we saw even the Biden administration, despite the fact that he gave massive amount of support and used the rhetoric, we will support you forever as long as you need it. No negotiations with Russia and never a deal with Russia without the Ukrainians at the table. Nevertheless, from the outset, Biden said no troops on the ground. They resisted pressure to provide F-16s and other types of things, being very cautious and wary of anything that could actually lead to a direct US-Russia confrontation. But what Ukraine may be doing now is another bite at that apple, because it may not just be that them striking at Iranian ships. They may be trying to merge the Ukraine war with the Iran war. By merging these wars, the Ukrainians don't just become a belligerent in the Iran war. It also makes the United States a belligerent in the Ukraine war, which is exactly what they've been trying to achieve for some time without success. And this time around, it would no longer just be the Ukrainians asking for help, but rather the Ukrainians are coming to the aid of the United States in this deadlock, in this dead end that Trump has put the United States in by starting this war in the first place, in which he doesn't have any good military options. As we just discussed, he started another war or another round of this war with no new ideas and ended up in the same place as before. So the Ukrainians may be trying here to present themselves not as asking for charity from the United States, but coming to the US's aid. But in that process, even if it may not be explicit, merge the Iran war with the Ukraine war. I think this would also be beneficial to the Israelis, because from the Netanyahu's perspective, he gets it further, another lease on life for the Iran war, which he wants to have it continue as long as possible. It brings the Europeans into the war with Iran in a way that only has been indirect at best so far. But also, now, attacking Iran, defeating Iran is no longer about defending Israel. It's about defending Ukraine. And the Ukraine war and its origins is very different from the Iran war, because there, Russia did invade that country. It was a violation of international law. It is a war of defense for the Ukrainians to defend themselves. Whereas in the Iran war, we're talking about two nuclear powers starting a war of aggression in the midst of negotiations against a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons. But all of that will be set aside because the Iran war will be part of the defense of Ukraine, which is seen as much more legitimate in a much larger number of countries and eyes around the world. So I think the merging of these two wars, I'm not saying it's successful or that it will be successful. I'm hoping that the Trump administration understands that the temptation of getting Ukrainian help in a situation in which the US is stuck may be there, but the cost of it is that you then end up becoming a direct belligerent in the Ukraine war beyond what the US has been so far, and that the Russians then also will become a part of the Iran war. It's a complete disaster. And I hope that they see it. But I can understand that the initial temptation that Trump may have of getting Ukraine's drone expertise part of the Iran war.
Yeah, one of the things that which could facilitate that dire path that you just described is depending on what Iran does in return. And I just put up here Abbas Araghchi a minute ago saying that this cannot go unanswered, all caps he puts in there. Now, if Iran does something and strikes back anything in Ukraine, that would seem to help the idea to merge the two together. Do you think Iran will do that?
I'm not so sure. It may be that they struck somewhere else instead of striking at Ukraine. They'll strike something in the Black Sea when it comes to the something proportionate that is seen more as a response rather than something that further moves this towards a merger. But in and of itself, that action can also contribute to a merging of these two wars, which again would be something that the Ukrainians believe they would benefit from, but is not something that I think the Iranians want. I don't think the Russians want it. Again, it gives war another chance, essentially.
Yeah, we don't need any more of that. Let's just bypass that. Maybe sanity will hold there, and they'll do something non-kinetic. I don't know. It's something we're going to keep an eye on, though. Thanks for that. You mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu a second ago. Well, he is also trying to reinsert himself back into this to keep the momentum. If anybody's saying, the 13 days that the United States was doing, that consecutive thing came to an end over the weekend. Then all of a sudden we didn't do the big ramp up. And now it seems like Benjamin Netanyahu wants to say, hey, don't forget about us.
It will take that for Iran to understand, either for this regime to fall or for Iran to realize that the cost of wreaking economic chaos to the world, murdering its thousands of its own citizens and shooting at everyone. I mean, literally at everyone. At Saudi Arabia, at Bahrain, at Qatar, at Kuwait, at the UAE, at Israel, at Jordan, every single one. I mean, this is what this regime is doing when they don't have nuclear weapons. So imagine what they would do if they had nuclear weapons. I think when this regime is either toppled or it's sufficiently weakened that it knows it has to end its nuclear program and has to change its course. That's really what President Trump is trying to achieve. And I back his fully.
So, yeah, I mean, they're just shooting everybody, Trita. I mean, my goodness, they're just crazy people. You gotta do something with that. I don't know why they're doing it, but they're just shooting at everybody. What do you say about that?
Look, I don't think there's been a single visit that Netanyahu has made to the United States since at least 2001, in which he hasn't pushed the U.S. to go to war with Iran or to sanction Iran or just to do something. So it would be completely out of character for him to show up today for Lindsey Graham's funeral, the biggest warmonger of them all, at least in the last couple of years, and not take the opportunity to push for this. And if you have that same push, not only come from the Israelis, but also from the Ukrainians. And on top of that, one other aspect. My suspicion is that the US military wasn't really gung-ho on this, but didn't have the guts to really stand up to Trump when he kind of lost patience with diplomacy. He wants diplomacy to just instantaneously give him results, and it doesn't. And he shifted towards restarting the war. And I think perhaps it was a scenario in which he really didn't present him with a real plan. Instead, that's why we all just saw a lot of things being blown up without any strategic utility. And that frustrated Trump, obviously, because now, he's back of flirting with diplomacy. But then the Israelis come into the picture and say, well, actually, we have a plan. This is what you should do. And then the question is, what is the resistance going to be if it is an Israeli plan versus nothing, or Israeli plan versus pulling out of the war? So I suspect that the Israelis may actually come with a plan, knowing very well that Trump is in one of these vulnerable situations again. He's frustrated that his current bombing campaign has not gone very far. It's not achieved anything. The military is telling him that escalation is going to create all kinds of vulnerabilities for the United States and US forces in the region. And so he's kind of stuck. And at the same time, there isn't an obvious path back to diplomacy because Trump has just destroyed diplomacy so much with his constant return to warfare. And I want to add one point to that at the end of this. But then the Israelis show up and they present a plan. And I think just like they did before, despite the fact that their plan is probably not going to be particularly good, they may be able to sell it as something that is strategically viable, that has that thing that the current plan does not. So I think in the next couple of days, we'll find out for sure where the direction is, whereas this weekend may not have been really the real deal. Yes, it seems like the decision was on Friday or Saturday not to go for further escalation, but that's different from saying that there's not going to be one at all. If the Israelis come in with a different plan, they might succeed. And if I could just say one thing about why Trump has really damaged diplomacy. It's not just what he has done in the negotiations themselves and pulling out of the negotiations to go back to war, or pulling out of the JCPOA in the first place, or both sides believe that the other side did not really live up to the terms of the MOU. But when you see this deal with the Saudis, in which the U.S. is, recklessly offering enrichment capability, the same technology that the U.S. for 25 years, 30 years have tried to prevent the Iranians from having, apparently we're going to grant that to the Saudis without the inspections that the Iranians agreed to in the JCPOA. But within 24 hours after announcing this, Trump takes to Twitter and he fundamentally changes the terms of the deal and says, well, this is contingent upon the Saudis normalizing relations with Israel. So, you strike a deal, you sign it, you announce it, you brag about it, and within 24 hours, you're changing the terms in a fundamental way.
Yeah.
Now, if that's what you do to Saudi Arabia, a country that the United States has a very close relationship, is a very close partner, on top of that, the Trump family has very close business ties with, then what are you going to do with Iran? What is the shelf life of any American commitment under Trump to the Iranians in any agreement? So those on the Iranian side who always have been very skeptical of any deal with the US, and those who have not been that skeptical, I think all of them have become even more skeptical after seeing this. Doesn't mean that, this deal, that Trump succeeded in changing the terms, but it shows again how uncommitted he is to whatever he has signed, that he at least tries to change it. And the way he did is that he just announced that it's been changed. And of course, the Saudis rejected that, and we'll see if this deal even survived this at all. But it just leaves an impression that there's absolutely no value to what he says, no value to what he signs.
And that, believe me, was completely recognized by the Iranian side, who Ismail Baghaei this morning said this.
Do not pay much attention to the media speculation. As I said, we currently have no negotiations with America. The negotiations that we have, and which may genuinely be subject to different interpretations, are the negotiations we have with Oman. They are focused on creating the necessary arrangements regarding the Strait of Hormuz.
So I know you only have about 1 minute left. If they're not going to negotiate with, they being Iran, is not going to negotiate with the United States, only with Oman, and that only about the Strait of Hormuz, where is this war going?
Well, it's actually very important, because if it goes back to the Iranians and the Omanis, they were more or less kind of on the same page before Marco Rubio kind of threatened the Omanis to come to the U.S. side of the interpretation of what should happen in the Strait. It appears that what they're talking about right now is, again, some form of a joint management of the Strait. This is what Rubio rejected before. He did not want to see any joint management of it. No fees, he said, no tolls, nothing, even if it's just environmental service fees. And others in the administration were more open to the idea that there would be joint management, but they wanted other countries in the Persian Gulf to also be part of it. I don't know if it's going to go in that direction now, but it seems now that this war is not going to come to an end, not by them agreeing to an MOU for them to negotiate about the Strait, but for the Strait issue to be resolved. Once it is resolved, the war ends. Now, there may be no shooting in between, but the Strait is not open until this agreement has been found. Now, the question is, do the Omanis negotiate with the authority of the U.S. behind them, or are they negotiating in the hope of coming up with a deal and then selling it to the U.S.? If that is the case, it may very well end up being used by the administration to get a much-needed pause in the war before they restart the war. And that pause is not necessarily because of depletion of munitions. They're not going to be able to replenish that in such a short period of time, but rather because it's better for Trump to have wars in intervals in which there are pauses in between that causes the oil markets to calm down. Get oil prices down, and then you restart the war. Once oil prices go too high, then you go back into some sort of a fake diplomacy, and then you restart the war after a while. If that ends up becoming the case, yes, then I think you will see the Iranians shooting at the ships throughout, and they don't care, and they will not accept the ceasefire, even though de facto it seems like they have. But it will also be a very dangerous situation because it will cause the Omanis to completely lose credibility with the Iranians, because the Iranians will be suspicious that perhaps the Omanis knew this and they went along with it anyways. If you have that trust bridge, which is one of the few ones that exist in the region, be broken, then truly it will be so much more difficult to be able to get back to any type of a negotiation. Look at what every administration has done. Because there is no trust between the US and Iran, they have used countries like Qatar and Oman to be able to restart negotiations because they had some credibility, mutual credibility between them and the Iranians. If that is destroyed, how are we going to restart diplomacy?
Yeah, and that strait remains closed, and the economic damage continues to accrue to us. And until we figure something out, that is going to continue on, no matter what he wants to do to manipulate the oil markets. Listen, Doug, I know you're out of time here, but just to remind people. And then that gave way to really the battle over the Strait of Hormuz. Well, now we're in a different battle right now, and this may be the most important one. And if we don't get this one right, or if we don't solve this problem here, we're going to be in a major, major world of hurt. And that is the battle of ammunition. Who can continue to fight this war the longest? And the answer is not what you may think. And in fact, we have been suffering from a lot of disinformation from a lot of our senior leaders, and then intentional shrouding of other information. We're going to pull that shroud back for you today, and we're going to show you what is no kidding going on at both the strategic and operational level, with ramifications down at the tactical level. You have to look and you have to understand how all three of those work together to understand why we're in such a difficult situation and why we better change course really fast. And by the way, that course change better not be going back to full-scale operations, or we will be cementing in our defeat. Let me first of all show you what Ambassador Mike Waltz said yesterday on television news, because he was asking about this question. Lots of people are worried about the ammunition, especially our long-range strike missiles and our air defense missiles.
A lot of stockpiles were depleted, not only from what we gave Ukraine over the last however many years, 4 or 5 years, and the administration inherited a depleted situation from not only Ukraine, but also the ongoing fight with the Houthis under the Biden administration and a depleted military under the Biden administration. So they have decided, one, they're going to new types of munitions, cheaper munitions, new technologies, but also with these new defense budgets, rebuilding our great military. The U.S. military, and I've verified this every which way, has everything that it needs to conduct this campaign as effectively as it needs to be. And I have to tell you, the people that are leaking this nonsense deserve to be in jail.
Yeah, whatever about that leaking information. Let's focus on the facts. Number one, he's lying. When you tell me that we've got all the ammunition we need, that is not true. Or maybe more accurately, it doesn't matter if we have billions of rounds of certain kinds of ammunition if we can't use them, and if using them doesn't accomplish anything on the battlefield. And that is really the issue that we're facing right here. Now, you know, as we were reporting over the weekend and just heading at the end of last week, we said a lot of information was going around there. We had some insider information that said that a large attack was planned over the weekend. I was planning on, Gary and I were both planning on coming back in either on Saturday or Sunday, whenever it turned out. And then all of a sudden there was no attack. Well, it turned out that we were able to get from a lot of information, some news information, that part of the reason was because the vice president and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff finally got through enough to President Trump to say, hey, we've got a real big issue here. And I think that's what Mike Waltz is referring to, these leaks, because whoever's leaking that the vice president and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs are staying these kinds of things, we can deal with that another day. But the fact is, those guys apparently did influence the president. And so we stopped this 13-day consecutive days of strikes that we've had. Now, I mentioned oftentimes that it seemed kind of sporadic and sort of random. And so I started doing some analysis over the weekend and started really looking at all kinds of different resources I did some research on some AI generators, lots of headlines, talking to a lot of other people who have knowledge about what's going on here. And I think I've got a pretty good idea now what we have been trying to accomplish in those 13 days and why we stopped at 13. What we did and didn't accomplish, and what that tells you about what may be coming next. And oh crap, we better figure out something next, because the one thing this 13 days revealed is what we were telling you before they ever attempted this. Even without all this knowledge that I've since gained, you don't have to be a genius to figure out if you couldn't get it done in 40 days when you were using all your best stuff and you had everything going on, to include all the help with the Israeli side together. If you couldn't budge the Iranian side then, why do you think 13 more days is going to do? And what is the hope if it doesn't? Well, we're now facing that problem. That's no longer a theoretical problem, because now we have to decide what are we going to do, since we are at critical levels on these important categories of weapons, like the JASSM long-range cruise missiles, the Tomahawk cruise missiles, the THAAD interceptor, and the PAC-3 interceptors, all of which are in critical situation right now. And let's go through what that means. What I did over the weekend, especially, is I put together this map here. I got it generated through Gemini. And I said, look, let's plot out all of the known locations we strike, not the number of strikes, because those were quite a large number itself, but many of these locations were attacked multiple times. And you see that there's a concentration down around the bend in the Strait of Hormuz, around the Bandar Abbas Naval Facility, Jask, and several other places down there. And then you see there's a few others scattered, though, some around Tehran, some all the way up in the northwest corner of Tabriz, you can see. The heavy water reactor there in Iraq. So several of them spread around. So in some of the even north of Kuwait, and of course at the Karg Island in that area right there. So I did some analysis to find out what exactly was the intent here, based on what we can see from what was hit. And again, this is pieced together for all kinds of information. This is Western reporting, Iranian reporting, European reporting, anything that was a credible and valid description of what was hit, we took together, and that's where we were able to put together that assessment right here. And what we were able to find out, first of all, let's look at what was officially said, even by Central Command. This was on the 22nd of July. I want to say this was after the 12th consecutive day. And you see the description there. U.S. forces struck Iranian missile targets, including maritime capabilities, missiles and drone storage facility, coastal surveillance sites, and air defense assets. The strikes further degraded Iran's ability to attack civilian mariners and commercial vessels. Now, listen, a portion of that was true. Not all of it, but a portion of it was. So they get a tiny bit of credit for telling the truth on something like what they shot. But the question is, though, aside from hitting those targets themselves, what was the intent behind them? What were they trying to accomplish by hitting that? And I think I've been able to identify three general axes of operational intent. So at the operational level, they were trying to reduce the maritime threat capability, because the idea is, of course, to get the Strait of Hormuz open. That's what we've been trying to do from March the 2nd forward, is to take control of the Strait of Hormuz back from the Iranian side. And so they were going after targets that had to do that. And we were talking about this during these 13 days, is that you're hitting all kinds of stuff on the coast. And notice again, the large number of these explosion icons down around the Strait of Hormuz. So you see all around that horseshoe bend, all up and down the coastline there, from the Bandar Abbas all the way out to Charbahar on the eastern side, and then up to Karg Island on the western side of the strait. You see a lot of that, hitting a lot of stuff along the coast. Okay, well, that's useful to a degree. If that was the only thing that Iran was using to control the Strait of Hormuz, that might have made some sense. As it turns out, we hit a lot of radar sites. We did hit integrated, that was the other thing, integrated air defense systems. So in addition to trying to peel away Iran's ability to control maritime traffic, the other thing was simultaneous to that was to knock out the integrated air defense system, the IEDS, as is sometimes referred to, so that planes and other kinds of ordnance could fly in without being intercepted. So we would shoot down additional radars. So some radars were oriented toward maritime traffic. Other radars were oriented towards incoming air assets, whether that be drones, planes, or missiles from our side. And then the other part was to use all of these strikes as a coercive measure, a coercive diplomatic pressure, so that we could, at the diplomatic level, at the political level, try to put pressure on the Iranian regime to say, hey, compelled to our desires, give us what we're asking for, open the Strait of Hormuz, and we give you nothing in return. That's what the intent was. But listen, we've told you over and over, let's go back to the map again. You see that they're hitting those known sites, and some of the ones deeper inside there, inside the country, like the Sirajan and Shiraz, and some of these others were more around the air defense capabilities to allow us to fly maybe further up into the country. But what you don't see on any of these target lists, or at least not many of them, is anything about the missile cities. This is the most glaring omission that it can be imagined. We have, after all the targets that we attacked in the first 40 days, and then now then in this new period here of the 13 days, and I think it was somewhere around 1,000 missiles were fired in total of this, primarily, somewhere around there, at least what we can gather public information. And what did you accomplish with this? So you succeeded at the tactical level. You succeeded at stripping away some of the radars, not all, but some of them. So that made it more difficult for Iran to navigate or even identify what's in the Strait of Hormuz at any one time. That could be useful. Then you got rid of some of the air radars that helped it identify incoming air assets. Okay, that's useful too. But if you did not touch any of their missile cities, that means that they retain all of the capabilities that they need to strike all throughout the length and depth and width of the Strait of Hormuz, or anything else for that matter in the entire region. Now, you may say, okay, but we're stripping away these radars. It makes it harder. You realize you can just get a dude on a camel and a cell phone or a satellite phone who can go down into the strait with a pair of binoculars and say, hey, here's at this map grid, you can take it out. That's it. That's how hard it is. And as we had earlier today, Trina Parsi was on the show, and he said some of his analysis and some other reporting is indicating that there has been an advancement in the intelligence capacity and targeting capacity of Iran in excess of whatever we hit here, implying that Russia and or China are providing real live feeds from satellites. And guess what? We didn't take any of those down. So what we did for 13 days was further deplete our ammunition of the 4 key categories that I just mentioned here. So that has made us even weaker. And that has put us into a real position here. And so here's the problem that we have left now, is that because we have our missile depletion, we have to start doing other things like raid some of our other accounts. Now, it's not like there's like one big pool here of all the missiles that America has in all these different categories. And, this is just depleting the whole batch of it. We have some that were for the Middle East. We have some that were for Europe, and we have some that were primarily for Asia/China. So those remained in their own cocoon, if you will. And meanwhile, we were doing things here, and then we were pulling stuff from the United States as we had any kind of national storage over there. Well, those are if not out, really low, which means if you're going to continue on beyond here, beyond these 13 days, if you want to restart this, if you want to listen to some of these nuts who are saying let's go back to full-scale war, you're going to have to raid what is our, no kidding, war supply, our war emergency fundamentals in the Indo-Pacific or in Europe. Do you want to do that? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think it's a good idea, just looking at this from the top level here, that we should burn through all these ammunition, so much ammunition, that we have exhausted all of it for the Middle East, leaving us with virtually none, at least not any of any substance, so much so that we now have to raid Indo-Pacific, which we have said for decades now is, the pivot to Asia under the Obama administration. And even President Trump said, yeah, this is where we're going to focus. The Bush administration, even before they left, we're really starting to highlight on India, on China. Now, all of a sudden, whatever, let's just raid those missiles. So whatever we had, which, by the way, we're never going to be enough. And I've said this many times before, it would be even more suicidal to ever fight China in a war for anything over there. Unless we're attacked, it would be suicidal for us to fight China over Taiwan or something else in the South China Seas or any of these other kinds of islands out there. It would be absolute suicide for us to do that. And we never had enough missiles to get that done. And all the stockpiles over there, as we have proven here in Iran, will get us through, 40 days, maybe 50 days, 60 days, give us, let's say, even more than that. What's going to happen after that period of time? You think China's going to run out after 60 days? They have been keenly aware of this, as have the Russians, and they understand now the criticality of strike weapons and air defense weapons. And so they have been spending overtime on their defense industrial base to make sure they have huge stockpiles of all those categories, while we have been draining ours on foolish and stupid wars in the Middle East and supporting the one in Ukraine, all to our detriment, making us weaker across the board. That's what we've done so far. Okay, well, what are the options here? Because it's not like JASSMs and Tomahawk cruise missiles are the only things we have. We have some others. A couple of being the JDAMs and the SDB. The SDB stands for small diameter bombs, and those are fired from things like the B-2 bombers, B-1s, F-35s, F-16s, F-18s, etc. All kinds of other aircraft. They can fire those too. So it's not just from the Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can be air launched, sea launched, or ground launched, etc. But there's a big problems there too. So I think that's what actually Ambassador Waltz was talking about in that first soundbite I showed you, where he said, "Hey, we got other ammunition we can use. We got tons of it," and they probably do. We probably do have a lot of JDAMs and a lot of SDBs. And probably a few other categories as well. However, there's a big problem with those. You can fire the Tomahawks and the JASSMs. They're long-range cruise missiles. You can fire them from literally hundreds of miles away. These, the JDAMs, some variants have ranges of about 15 miles, some about 30 miles. I understand some can maybe go out to 40. The SDBs have a little bit better. They can go out to about 60 miles. But every one of these has to be air-launched. They have to be used our fighter jets. So if you now stop using these kinds of the Tomahawk cruise missiles, or if you're running low on the ATACMS, because we also have some ground launch missiles that you could also add in there, but those are also running low because we've given some of those to Ukraine as well. We've given some to Israel, and we've used some here already too. So I don't know the number of those. I haven't been able to ascertain the level, but I know that we've used quite a few. But those also have some limited numbers and some limited limitations on where they can be fired. And now then, if you are saying we can no longer use these JASSM and Tomahawk cruise missiles, the long-range stuff, now then we're going to have to go in and use more of our aircraft. Let's say that we listen to Jack Keane and then we go back to full-scale war. Okay, and let's say that we get another 40 days. And we say, well, let's just repeat the first one here, with now using these other kinds of aircraft instead of all the Tomahawks and the JASSMs, and let's see if that doesn't budge the Iranians for loose. Well, number one, it's not going to change anything because the missile cities are just as impervious to JDAMs and SDBs as they are to Tomahawks and JASSMs. That's the first thing you need to understand. But the second thing is even more important to understand is that now then, and remember, in the first 40 days of this, we lost 42 aircraft, a handful of fighter jets, some air refuelers, and some helicopters, of course, and then those two C-130s that were hit on the ground trying to apparently rescue a pilot. But it was 42, and then MQ-9 Reaper drones, which are terribly important for us to fight and support because that's targeted acquisition and intelligence and surveillance of the battlefield. The loss of those has been a lot so far. Well, now then, if you rely on these, we didn't have to put that many pilots at risk in the past because we could fire it from so far back, or from the ground launch locations, or even sea launch locations. Well, now you're going to have to launch nearly all these, and certainly all the JDAMs and the SDBs, from the air. So that means you have to fly further over enemy territory. You have to take more risk that they have anti-aircraft missiles that may come up, or anti-aircraft fire, so it's going to put them at risk. We have air dominance over the battle space, but that's not air supremacy. There is still a risk, and they'll continue to be a risk. But there's also the issue of wearing out the planes. You are going to be putting so many flight hours on these things that they're not designed for. They're not set up. Our Air Force is not designed to fight continuous, long-term, sustained aerial combat. We're going to be burning these platforms up. And again, just like using up the high-speed launch long-range missiles, the JASSMs and the Tomahawks, You start using up your 4th and 5th gen fighters, and what are we going to do if suddenly we need to get into an unexpected fight against Russia or China? Too few people are thinking of that. I am. The Chinese and the Russians are too. They are tracking this. And so I think one of the reasons they have not gotten into this war is they're content to let us continue to burn through all of our missiles, especially our important long-range missiles and air defense missiles. And they're content to let us burn through our aircraft and our JDAMs and everything else, because even those can't be manufactured, 100 at a time, or just, you can't ramp those up really quickly. We're trying to do a lot of that stuff, but it takes time. And I'm talking time measured in years. When Mike Waltz in that soundbite I showed you at the start of the show here, he made that same comment, like, oh, and we're expanding, we're building all kinds of new factories. Yeah, that's great. Years from now, 2028, 2029, 2030, this war is going to be over long before then. We can't even get to that point, folks, if our economy is not going to survive this. And more on that in just a second. But right now, I'm talking about our national defense. Understand this. Everything I'm telling you right now continues to whittle away and diminish our national security capacity over a war that Benjamin Netanyahu wanted, and he's going to be here tomorrow. God only knows what he's going to get President Trump to do. He's certainly going to try to get him to go back to full-scale war. But we can't do that and still maintain our global requirements, because we are degenerating our military readiness across the board in every area that matters for a war that doesn't matter. That's what we need to understand here. So those are some of the biggest issues that we have here, that the burn rate would just be astronomical. If we did another 40-day bombing campaign, if we did another 13-day bombing campaign, all we would accomplish is getting rid of more of our ammunition, would not change the balance of power on the ground, because we're not even hitting the targets that matter, because Iran has foreseen this. And no matter what we take away, no matter how many people we kill, how much difficulty it is on their economy, they will endure it. They've had experience doing it before. Their culture, their religion, their mentality right now is suffering, and they are willing to do it because their anger is so great at us, and they realize they do math too. They can see all these things I'm pointing out to you, and they realize the longer this goes, the attrition warfare ain't going to be hurting them, folks. It's going to be hurting us. And understand this: in an attritional warfare, both sides are going to be hurt. That's just how it works. There's no way around that. But you've got to be able to survive one day longer than the other side can. So if they run out of ammunition, if their economy runs off the cliff, all you've got to do is survive one day longer. And that is something that is so important to understand about this war here. For the United States to succeed, we have to defeat militarily and politically Iran. We either have to get the regime change that Sid Rosenberg was begging for yesterday. I showed you that on Sunday. Or we have to get them to compel and comply with what we're doing. But how are we going to get that done if we run out of ammunition? How are we going to get that done if they're able to extend beyond what we can, because their mentality is to suffer? And even if they have to suffer great loss, even physical loss, they're willing to do it. And they demonstrated it. This is not just rhetoric. They've demonstrated this before. And what if we try to do this and all we end up doing is making ourselves weaker and proving again that we can't penetrate granite mountains? Folks, this is not that hard to figure out. You may not like the answer here, but the fundamentals are screaming that they will impose themselves, and it will work out this way if we continue to ignore reality. And unfortunately, there are those who want to ignore reality. So let me show you something that was on Fox News. I think this was on there today. Victoria Coates was asked a question about, should we think about doing something else, like finding a diplomatic way out of this? And as the anchor here is going to say in a minute, cut and run, which obviously is a poison pill phrase. But she answers that and says, yeah, we shouldn't do that.
If we can manage our economic situation responsibly and not have too much pain on the American people, that pressure internally on Iran is what might eventually get this thing across the finish line.
So you agree with Senator Kennedy? America should not cut and run, right?
No, I don't see the point. I mean, the president's done what no previous president has been willing to do, which is take major kinetic action against Iran and actually degrade them physically and go after their nuclear program. It would be a waste of time and effort if we were to cut and run. And especially since I think we've set in motion a kind of an inevitable disintegration of the Iranian regime.
Oh my God, are you serious? Can you say that with a straight face? And why didn't the anchor say anything? Inevitable disintegration of the Iranian regime? Did you not hear? Obviously, you didn't hear this. Are you not aware that they suffered 8 years of a war that we supported by Iraq against Iran? 8 years. Hundreds of thousands, not 3,000 or 4,000, not 10 or 20,000, hundreds of thousands of dead, Iran. The virtual destruction of their economy, and yet they endured and they survived. That's recent history. And somehow you think that now, after a few weeks of economic difficulty, that they're going to somehow do what they haven't do differently than they did previously just a handful of years ago? I mean, that's insane. Because she's advising the United States to go on a course of action with the inevitable destruction of the Iranian regime when there's no evidence for it. In fact, there's screaming evidence to the opposite. Even politically, we see a hardening of their resolve and the people, tens of millions of them, for the government that never were before. Not in this level, certainly not to this degree, thanks to our war of choice. She seems to be oblivious to that. No, let's just fire some more missiles and don't cut and run because of the sunk cost fallacy. Yeah, well, we've already done this stuff. It would be a waste if we just walked away then. It was a waste the day you started, Victoria. That's the problem, President Trump. You should never have started this. And that sunk cost was paid in blood too, but also treasure and ammunition, physical ammunition. Some things are more important than money. You can allocate $100 billion on a bunch of new missiles, but you can't make them until years from now. So you talk about what's inevitable. Let's take a look at what may be inevitable. Because of all of these, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the restriction now on the Bab el-Mandab in the Red Sea, that has just exacerbated the problem. There are some near-term problems that are coming up. Not just the price of oil, not even just the global supply of oil, as important as that is, but the more important things are diesel fuel, jet fuel, fertilizers, and helium, because on those things so many other economic work depends. You cannot produce GDP if you don't have all the energy inputs, and that means all of them, not just oil, not just gas, not just energy, but the diesel fuel to move things around, the fertilizers to grow crops, jet fuel to transport things around, and people, obviously. And all of those things are in significant constraint right now. And it's not even just so much the price of oil per se as it is the derivatives that come out of it, because economic activity is made by all of those things. And you want to risk all of that by trying to coerce little Iran into doing something we want? What do we even gain from that? From all this profound cost? It's crazy. And yet, we're running down a path to where we're making ourselves militarily defenseless. If not defenseless, it's severely constrained. No matter how many planes, aircraft carriers, tanks, you name it, that we have, if you don't have ammunition for all this stuff, folks, it's not going to mean a damn thing. So you're wearing out the military. You're running down the defense stockpiles. You're burning through our oil reserves, the strategic petroleum reserve. You're raising the cost of doing anything, and you're diminishing the availability of the very inputs, the petroleum inputs that we need to make our economy function. And there's no way that you're going to wrest control of it out of the Strait of Hormuz or probably the Bab el-Mandab either. And yet all of that doesn't seem to get through to these people, because as bad as it was for Victoria Coates there, it's a lot more direct for Jack Keane.
We're on a pathway, I think, to returning to major combat operations. And certainly, if we're able to get back to that, it'll be quite devastating on Iran. Not only will they lose what remaining military capability have, but they're going to lose every economic viability that they have, to include their oil business and other businesses that provide an income for them. our plan is quite massive. It exceeds everything that we did in Epic Fury and then some. And obviously the Israelis will participate.
You know what's absurd about that comment right there? Often he's the chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, and I say all the time they're really great on maps, they're terrible on analysis. Well, sometimes when no one's paying attention, sometimes they actually tell the truth at the granular level on some of these reports that they put out. They put out reports every day. Of the 13-day, I don't even know what you call it, mini offensive that we just did, the ISW did an analysis of that because it's been, 2 or 3 days that we haven't done any. So they did an analysis of what was done. Jack Keane, the chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, just said, hey, man, let's go back and do another one that's even bigger than the 40-day war here. But then you look and see what his organization said about the 13-day war, and it's a little different than he's talking about here. This is published yesterday. The current level and type of U.S. strikes have likely failed to meaningfully affect the Iranian regime's willingness to pursue and secure its strategic objectives with force, including long-term control over the Strait of Hormuz. The United States struck roughly 1,000 targets between July 12th and July 24th, compared to 13,000 in 38 days of the war's first phase in April and March. The United States has not conducted strikes in Iran since July 24th. So you failed with 13,000 targets that you struck in 40 days or 38, as they said. Another 1,000 here. You failed here. You failed here. And now, Mr. Chairman, you want to go back and do even more? Why did these two fail? Was it because you didn't use enough bombs? Or was it because all the bombs you used could not penetrate the granite mountains? Folks, it ain't that hard to figure out. There is some kind of mist, some kind of cloudy blindness over the elite of our country. Either that, or they actually want to go back into war because they want this thing to get plunged into a big fight. I don't know. There's a lot of theories about that floating around there. I used to just dismiss them out of hand, but when you see so many ostensibly intelligent people making actions that almost can't do anything besides lead to our destruction and failure, definitely a loss. And again, remember, China and Russia are paying a great deal of attention to this, and they see in this once mighty behemoth military power of America shredding itself, making us defenseless. If they wanted to start a war, I don't think it's in any of their interest to do so right now, but you got to think that they're giving it some consideration now because they're seeing America, they know we can't do it. They know our industrial base is a pathetic minimal of what it could be, what theirs is, because we don't want to do that. We didn't want to go full on war. We just want these companies to make a lot of money. And so we'll just keep doing things the way we have, maybe a little bit more. We'll expand that out a little bit, but it won't come in time. It's to be multiple years into the future if it ever happens at all. And yeah, we may go up to $1.5 trillion, crazy number, $1 trillion defense budget, but what's that going to do for us? That's years into the future. That's putting money into the pockets of people right now. All these rich people, all the elites, they're making money hand over fist. So they couldn't be happier. But our national defense itself is being shredded before your eyes based on the advice of people like Victoria Coates, Jack Keane, General Kellogg, Mike Pompeo, all these different people that we keep putting on here. And President Trump, because he's at the top of the list. He's the decision maker. He's the one that's going to make this happen. And you have guys like Mike Waltz, several of these other people that were going on the Sunday shows, all Senator Kennedy was another one on this weekend, making every excuse in the world why we need to keep fighting wars. Oblivious, apparently, to all the things that I'm telling you right here. I think, I just don't have enough knowledge to know if there's some twisted reason why they want to go down a path to where we're going to be militarily defenseless. It doesn't seem that it would make any sense, but what they're doing now definitely doesn't make any sense. This stuff, I'm telling you, it's not hard to figure out. I don't have access to any classified information. I don't have access to anybody with classified information. All of this is open source stuff. Much of it provided by Central Command. Thank you very much. Other stuff from some Middle Eastern sources. It's all open source. Anyone can figure this out. Why can't they? They do have access to most of these people I put on TV here, other than maybe Victoria Coates. They do have access to classified information. They have access to people with classified information. How can they not figure this stuff out? And then you see it manifest on the ground. It's not hard to figure out. I don't know the motivations. I'll stop speculating because it doesn't do any good. But what I will continue to do for you is to be unintimidated and uncompromised, to tell you the truth and to graphically show you that what you're seeing with your own eyes is real. And the potential consequences later on to you, not just to our country, but to you personally, because of all of these economic situations. I'm telling you, President Trump or whoever did a masterful job of manipulating the oil market. And it dropped like $7, $8 over the weekend on the claim that some kind of new diplomacy was coming in. We want to give spaces. The ambassador said there's space to more diplomacy and more talks, which is complete crap. There are no talks. The Iranian side says they're not talking to anybody here because they don't trust a word we say. That was for the market, and it worked for today. But what it didn't do is change the amount of oil on the market. It didn't affect how much diesel fuel exists, how much jet fuel exists, how much fertilizer exists, and all the helium, etc. And the lack of inputs is what's going to have an effect on your farming, on getting food to market, on transporting everything. All of this stuff is real, and it's going to build up, and you can't manipulate that away. It's reality. And all of those things are coming here. And we just have to hope and pray that, like President Trump at least did, acknowledge and exceed that the 13-day thing failed and said, hey, we got to stop and do something different. So they didn't have the big over the weekend. So there is still some hope that maybe enough information can get out there and maybe some sanity can get through, at least to prevent us from further weakening ourselves and putting our country and our national security at unnecessary vulnerability. We can only hope. But you're going to keep getting the truth here. We appreciate you guys. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the game. Zelensky is expanding the war, not just by firing deeper into wild berries and that kind of economic targets in Russia. He struck an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea over the weekend. Tehran has accused Kiev of hostile criminal act. Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister from Iran, made this interesting statement here. He said that Zelensky has attacked an Iranian commercial vessel, killing a sailor. And he calls on the EU High Representative Kallas to make clear what the freeloader in Kiev did cannot go unanswered. So what in the heck is going on with Zelensky here? Let me show you what Zelensky has said into why he's going here.
If Iran, from the first year of the war, gave new technology to Russia, it was Shahid drones. They gave thousands of these drones first year of the war. Then they gave licenses. What did they do? Did they attack us? I think yes. So they already did it. But we have to be honest. Iranians and North Koreans already attacked us.
Okay, so we're 4.5 years into this. Why did if he said in the first year of war, why did he just now attack and destroy, or at least attack and disable an Iranian commercial vessel for that justification?
Well, to be honest, I don't know if that was done deliberately, because initially the report was that they struck a Russian ship sending goods to Iran. So I think Ukrainian intelligence actually got this one wrong. But then when it became apparent that it was an Iranian ship, Zelensky, remember who was giving that interview, Laura Loomer, who's, we'll just leave it at that. Sort of a self-parody, it's a self-parody. Of a journalist. Once it became, this is a man who's desperate to spin anything in a way that seemed positive. The United States right now is having an extraordinarily difficult time with Iran. Donald Trump had to cease hostilities at a moment when he's saying he was going to bring the hammer down because we're out of ammunition. And now there's a growing recognition that we've got nothing left. It's over. There's literally nothing we can do. And there's frustration. And so Zelensky's now basically hitting that button before he comes to talk to Trump. And he's saying, look, Iran is a problem here too. We're doing you a favor, America. We hit an Iranian ship. I don't think he knew he was hitting an Iranian ship when they struck it, but now he's taking credit for it. And then he's throwing in North Korea. I mean, because there's rumors now, possibly true, that the North Koreans are going to provide up to 30,000 troops who are going to defend, part of the Russian borders. The North Korean troops do not fight in the Donbass, Zaporozhye, or Kherson. It's purely a Russian operation, but they'll come up and take a sector. They helped with the liberation of Kursk, and they'll now defend a sector, freeing up 30,000 Russian troops to come down and, do that thing we were talking about in Odessa. And so now he's going to be putting that marker out there too. This is just a sign of Zelensky's desperation. This is the same thing with Europe. Basically, declare a war on the world in order to, go down with the Ukrainian ship. Because, guys, the Ukraine is the Titanic. It's hit the iceberg. Ain't nothing going to save it. You can put the band on there. They can play all the music you want. You can have guys running around on top, and it looks good for a while. The ship's going down. How long it's going to take for it to sink? Don't know. But I do know this. It's sinking, and it ain't going to recover. And Zelensky's trying to pretend that somehow we can patch the hole and keep the Titanic on course. We can't.
Does he think, though, that whether it was an accident or intentional, he certainly is now saying it's an intentional. So he says, yeah, they're at war with us, and so we sink that ship. Does he think that somehow that can spawn additional support for him, that somebody will say, well, let's do more for Ukraine? Because I can't really come up with a good reason why he would want to do that.
Again, I don't think that this was pre-planned, so I think we're seeing reaction here. And so it's reactive. So he's saying things that he think will resonate well with Trump. Iran provided weapons to Russia. Right now there's a Ukrainian theme of Russia providing weapons and intelligence to Iran to bring harm to America. I think Marco Rubio dispelled that. But, this is part of the Ukraine. This is a propaganda war. That's what people need to understand. We are in the midst of an information war where, things are being blown out of proportion. Anything that is sympathetic to the Russian cause, the reality of Russia, is suppressed. Anything that magnifies the potential of Ukrainian victory or the legitimacy of the Ukrainian cause is magnified. And so here we have a situation where, Iran did provide Shahed drone technology to the Russians when they needed it in 2022, 2023. Russia's licensed it. Zelensky's not wrong here. And now he's paying the price. And so he's trying to use this as a way of getting Donald Trump to have even more sympathy for Ukraine, to commit more resources. I think he's going to run into a brick wall. I'll just give you my prediction of what's going to happen. You remember the dressing down Zelensky got the last time he went to the White House? I think Zelensky's about to get slapped hard by Trump, because Trump is not a stable man right now. One only has to look at the deal he did with Saudi Arabia. And we're talking about a 6-month negotiation to bring nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia, finally concluded. And then Donald Trump blows a fuse and says, none of this happens unless you agree to the Abrams Accords, which were never part of the negotiations. And the Saudis said, pound sand. I mean, so now that agreement's done. This is Donald Trump. He promised to license Patriot technology. Zelensky's going to come in and overplay his hand. And Donald Trump, I think, is going to snap, and I think you're going to see Zelensky get tossed out of the White House. That's my prediction.
Yeah, well, there's certainly some history there. I want to go down a path of one other thing you said regarding the Iran war. And you talked about our problem with ammunition and how that has been expended during the war and what we have left to continue prosecuting the war. And the other thing you mentioned about the propaganda war. It turns out that some of the victims of the targets maybe of this propaganda war are the American people. Here is Mike Waltz over the weekend trying to dismiss that. Gary, let's play the one here. It's called Waltz Weapons.
A lot of stockpiles were depleted, not only from what we gave Ukraine over the last however many years, 4 or 5 years, and the administration inherited a depleted situation from not only Ukraine, but also the ongoing fight with the Houthis under the Biden administration and a depleted military under the Biden administration. So they have decided, one, they're going to new types of munitions, cheaper munitions, new technologies, but also with these new defense budgets, rebuilding our great military. The U.S. military, and I've verified this every which way, has everything that it needs to conduct this campaign as effectively as it needs to be. And I have to tell you, the people that are leaking this nonsense deserve to be in jail.
Okay, so apparently, I guess that's Vice President Vance and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, who I guess need to be in jail because they are definitely saying there's some big issues here. So what do we need to make of what apparently the Vice President and the Chairman are saying versus what Ambassador Waltz is saying regarding how much ammunition we have to keep fighting?
Well, remember, Waltz is the public face. He's not a policymaker. He's the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. So his job is to serve as a sounding board for American policy, to project it into the international community. One of the ways that you, again, we come back to, Thomas Schelling's war game theory, the ability to, project pain. That if you have that ability to project pain, it brings with you a certain deterrence value, because people say, I don't want that pain projected onto me. So I am now deterred. And Mike Waltz's job is to, basically use the perception of American power in this international forum to bully nations into compliance. This is his job. That's all his job is. He's literally a mafia strong arm man. He's going around, collecting the payouts from the various, bar owners and store owners. He's a thug. He's a straight up thug. But it's hard to be a thug when suddenly it turns out that because the thug's only good if people think that the big boys are coming through to break your neck. As long as you're afraid of the big boys, you're going to pay the payout. But now Waltz is confronted with the fact that there are no big boys. There's a bunch of old men with bad knees, arthritis in the hands, limp along, torn rotator cuff, and nobody's afraid of these people anymore. America's been shown to just be this empty shell of a power. We can't beat Iran. Let's just let that sink in for a second. We can't beat Iran. Not only that, Iran is beating us. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're losing this war. We lost this war. Iran hits us hard. We're blowing up empty buildings. We don't know what we're hitting at all. And we don't have the ability to go deep anymore. We used all that in the first 39 days of conflict. We didn't suddenly magically wave a magic wand and have all of our defense industry wake up and go, we're going to produce a whole bunch more missiles in a very short period of time. We're producing nothing, ladies and gentlemen. The money that's been allocated hasn't reached there. We aren't increasing our production yet. We may down the road, but it'll take years for this to happen.
Yep.
Years for this to happen. Meanwhile, Donald Trump re-engaged saying, I want more intense conflict. It hasn't been more intense. It was more intense the first 39 days. Why? We don't have the ammunition. Nothing. And here you are. Look at the time it takes, 64 months to build an SM-3 missile, but we've blown through 2/3 of our SM-3. THAAD, 80% of the THAAD missiles are gone. 53 months. SM-6, JASSMs, Tomahawks. We only had 90 of these precision strike munitions. It takes 46 months. We had 90. We used 80. We got 10 left. Guys, it's over. We have no ammunition. What we're using are HIMARS and ATACMS missiles on Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE to strike targets along the coastline. And that creates a perception of power. We use these JDAMs, which is basically the joint, the standoff bombs, but they're not powered. So that your airplanes have to go high, drop, satellite guides them in on the target. Well, one of the problems with JDAMs is they get jammed. I mean, people... Go look at what the Russians are doing to the JDAMs by the Ukrainians. They're jammed, they get shot down, all that. We're not hitting anything. And what we go in with deep, we're bombing empty buildings. We don't know what we're striking, and we're just burning through ammunition. And Donald Trump said, I really want to put the pressure up. And the military came to him and said, we can't. We don't have anything left. And if we continue this, we'll be totally defenseless right now. All of our air defense is stripped away. And the Iranians have ballistic missiles that will never end. And right now they're doing a lot of harm to us. They're taking out hangars that they shouldn't be taking out, but they're taking them out. And if we continue this war, they'll take out all of the hangars. We'll have nothing left. we've lost this war, so we stopped the war. Now, he hasn't declared a formal cease. We just stopped bombing. And now the Iranians went out and said, well, you stop bombing, we'll stop our missiles. So there's a ceasefire that isn't a ceasefire. And this is the reality right now. We can't win this war. Now, so Waltz is out there saying these things. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Trump is being briefed on the reality by J.D. Vance, by General Kane, by others. And there are people who are leaking this to the press. And here I agree with Waltz. And look, I believe in the free press. Absolutely. It's our responsibility as journalists to speak openly. And if we gain access to information, I mean, we use our own due diligence to say, are we bringing true harm to the country? But as the New York Times, in the New York Times versus the United States decided during the Pentagon Papers case, they said the government can't hide lies behind a wall of secrecy. And that's the responsibility of the press to expose these lies so the American people can make a decision, especially when the consequences of the lies are American soldiers dying in a foreign land. Literally, that's what that Supreme Court case was all about. And so we have the responsibility to do this. So yes, if I receive information that says we're running out of ammunition and we have the president trying to promote a war contingent upon the availability of ammunition, that puts American lives at risk in a foreign land. We have a duty and responsibility to bring this to the American people so they can act accordingly. That's our job. But if I'm in government and I signed a non-disclosure agreement and I have a class, I'm not allowed to leak it to the press. And so I do agree with Mike Waltz. The people who leak this to the press, they need to be found out and prosecuted, or else there's no reason to have secrecy. So he's not wrong there, but thankfully there are people who have the courage to call out lies when they do. And it's someday, I think, not now, but someday the judiciary will recognize the intent of that Supreme Court finding, New York Times versus United States. When the government is using secrets to hide the truth, and the consequences of this is dead American soldiers,
Right, that's one of the things that
you have a responsibility to talk about it, and it isn't a crime, therefore, to leak this information. I think we need to get to that point.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. And then the last few minutes here we have, I'd like your real quick take on, there was before Senator Graham suddenly passed away from whatever source. So we're not going to worry about that at the moment. But obviously we used to have him on here a lot with his crazy statements, and we'd have that weird, here comes a crazy statement, whatever. Well, that's over. So he's gone now. But there was a group that was in the middle of doing a documentary on him. They released some of that before they released the whole thing here. And I thought this one clip here was really interesting because it shows the mentality almost of like children that were playing at war and not serious statesmen trying to find an end to a war and a benefit to our country. Watch this.
Virtually everything they have has been knocked out now. Their missile count is going way down. No. Amazingly, they're hitting countries.
Look what we've done here. I know. I almost cried. Yeah. I mean, like, how long have we been pushing this?
Well, I mean, you've been pushing this for years, right?
Right. It's here. I talked to Trump this morning.
It's literally.
Oh, he's jacked. Yeah. It's the best thing I've ever done. He loves blowing stuff up. So, there are a lot of people inside didn't want to do it. So I had my challenges. But President Trump, when he gets into the zone, he listens, he asks good questions, no tweeting. He has done nothing. He hadn't tweeted much at all. No drama. He's been a great wartime president. I said last night that Trump and Bibi are like Roosevelt and Churchill. I mean, they're the right two guys to confront this evil.
Roosevelt and Churchill, what say you?
First of all, I think we need to be honest and open here. These weren't spontaneous comments made by the perfume princess in charge, the former perfume princess, Lindsey Graham, who I openly despise and will always despise. There's a documentary film crew there. He's saying this for posterity. He's saying this, and this is carefully scripted. They can shut off the camera until he gets his act together or whatever. He knows what he's saying here. This is part of the Lindsey Graham propaganda machine that he's been propagating for some time now. understand the open hypocrisy of this man, because on occasion, Lindsey Graham could be articulate and say things that were honest, such as Donald Trump is a liar, the worst man in the world who should never be president of the United States. He said that back in 2016. Now, nothing's changed about Donald Trump, except the fact that now Lindsey Graham finds Donald Trump convenient to promote his warmongering policies that, it just... It can make me sick to my stomach as somebody, this is a man who was, using Iwo Jima as an excuse to invade Karg Island. I'm like, well, wait a minute, Lindsey, sort of a Marine thing. We made a decision in the 1980s to stop building memorials to dead Marines, that we thought maybe it'd be better to fight smarter, maneuver warfare, things of that nature. And whatever happened to diplomacy? This is a man who's never been in armed combat in his life. He's a lawyer who's been there. He went to Afghanistan, stayed in an air-conditioned office, never got near the fighting, that wouldn't know. He would puke if blood had splattered on his boots or his uniform. And he's out there promoting the death of people. The death of people. He's the most disgusting human being in the world. And if there's a place in hell for him, I hope he's roasting there right now like the fat, overstuffed pig that he is. And I apologize, but I despise the man. He is responsible for the deaths of millions of people. Moreover, he's responsible for the death of America. If the Americans don't understand that we are dead, read the Constitution and understand what's happening in this country right now. Look at everything that's happening in its totality. We no longer function as a constitutional republic. And a large reason out of the policies that have been espoused and promoted by Lindsey Graham since he became a U.S. Senator in 2003.
Wow. Well, that's an arguable position and a defendable one. And it stands on its own. Your views are what you say they are, and there's a lot to go through with that. So anyway, we thank you very much for coming on today. Sorry to cut it a little bit short, but we have about 1 minute before we have Trina.
Because NBC News is reporting the Pentagon is actually rationing some defense weaponry amid diminishing supplies. Is America backing away from a larger military attack because its military stockpile has been depleted?
I want to be crystal clear. The U.S. military, and I've verified this every which way, has everything that it needs to conduct this campaign as effectively as it needs to be. And I have to tell you, the people that are leaking this nonsense deserve to be in jail.
Well, that was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, and he's a liar, a massive liar. And that's putting it lightly, because through his lies, he's putting our troops in danger. In fact, President Trump has now opted to take a pause in bombing Iran after 13 nights of pummeling the country. And it's not because Trump necessarily wants to end the war. It's because he had to. So let me make the case, as some in the audience want to justify Ukraine entering a war against Iran, which still has 70% of its ballistic missiles intact. Ballistic missiles, which Ukraine doesn't have the capacity to shoot down. Anyway, top advisors and senior members of the administration met with Trump last week on Friday to basically discuss the fact that we're in a lot of trouble. The United States military is in a lot of trouble in this war against Iran because the Pentagon has depleted its stock of Patriot interceptors and other air defenses. So this has been a problem since the beginning of the war against Iran. This is not new information. It's just shocking to me that 5 months after Trump started this war, we finally have members of his administration bringing up the fact that we have depleted our missile interceptors. The New York Times reported that 3 US soldiers in Jordan were killed last Friday when a ballistic missile slipped through American air defenses, fending off a barrage of Iranian missiles and drones, a senior US official said. In fact, the Iran war casualty count has increased to over 600 US service members. So the Pentagon updated its war casualty database just this past weekend on Saturday, recording more than 140 service members who had been wounded in addition to the numbers we previously had. So the number we previously had was 482. When the new Pentagon data is combined with updated totals for Operation Epic Fury, 18 troops have died and another 624 have been wounded since the US launched its war against Iran on February 28th. How many IDF soldiers were killed in this war against Iran, which started on February 28th? Since, this is a war Israel wanted, and this is a war that the US has entered on Israel's behalf. Let me look at my notes. Zero, none, zero. Okay. So as a result of how badly the US is losing this war, General Dan Kane, who is the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned Trump privately that resuming major combat operations against Iran was doable, but that it would dangerously deplete interceptors available to the Military Central Command, which is responsible for operations in the Middle East. So how many interceptors do we have left? That's the real question. Apparently, the administration is putting out claims that we have about 1,000 interceptors left. But there are some CIA analysts who are saying the number's closer to 400. Larry Johnson is one of those former CIA analysts who put that data out. And he says that it's publicly available data. So I don't know why the government lies to us when we can actually see what's really going on here. So obviously, continuing the war when we don't have the means to defend US service members in the region would be a dumb move. One senior US official who also spoke on the condition of anonymity expressed doubts that resuming major combat operations would drive Iran back to the bargaining table. The official said the strikes have the opposite effect of what is intended, keeping Iran cohesive and allowing Iranian leaders to focus attention on an external threat. That has also been true since the very beginning of this war. It was very obvious. What the war has done is it has created this rally around the flag effect in Iran. And in fact, we all witnessed that as the funeral events were taking place in Iran after the former supreme leader was killed, assassinated by the United States and Israel. So, Ben Shapiro, on the other hand, clearly could not care less about the United States military, their capabilities, or how vulnerable our soldiers happen to be. What he would like to do is ensure that the media zip it up, do not report the truth. We want to lie to the American people, but more importantly, have our service members go to war without the appropriate military stockpiles necessary to fight a war effectively and to defend themselves. Don't believe me? Here's what he said. When you're leaking falsely, according to President Trump, let's just pause right there. Oh, Trump told you that we're all good? That we're not low on missile interceptors? Oh, okay. I mean, how often do you think Ben Shapiro, who loathes Donald Trump? He does, he loathes Donald Trump. Do you really think that he trusts anything that comes out of Trump's mouth? Or is he just, very conveniently choosing to pretend like in this case, Trump isn't a liar? Let's go back to it. When you're leaking falsely, according to President Trump, to CNN and the New York Times and Barack Ravid that we're short on interceptors, you're helping Iran. Trump must track down and fire the leaders in his administration, the leakers, I should say, the leakers in his administration who continue to undermine his pursuit of America's interests. He's such a weaselly little liar because obviously this war against Iran has nothing to do with US interests. It has depleted our weaponry. It has cost us already over $100 billion.
Do you know your brain rot index? No, of course you don't. I didn't either because I didn't know what it was, but turns out you might want to.
This is a war for Israel. Are they bankrolling this war? Of course not. Are they losing soldiers in this war? Of course not. Ben Shapiro just wants the war to continue. Service members getting killed be damned. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. And he would like the media to shut the F up about what the truth is. And while Shapiro excoriates, the few media outlets that report the truth and wants to go after the leakers because they're the real problem, right? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the internationally wanted war criminal, plans to put in work on Trump during his now 8th visit to the United States to visit him? Let's take a look at that.
I think when this regime is either toppled or it's sufficiently weakened that it knows it has to end its nuclear program and has to change its course. That's really what President Trump is trying to achieve. And I back his fully his efforts to do so. If he can do so without returning to intense military fighting, that's fine. Why not? But one way or the other, they have to end their nuclear program.
And you're getting set to travel to the U.S. to meet with President Trump and then attend the funeral services of Senator Lindsey Graham. Prime Minister, what can you tell us about any fresh new intelligence that you may have about that nuclear program that you are about to present President Trump with?
Our intel services and yours are working so close together that it's not that I'm going to present new information, but I think it's a good thing to have the opportunity to sit with our good friend, President Trump, and to hear what he has in mind, because I think in many ways, it's his decision.
I think in many ways, the country that's a big threat to world peace and to the safety of us all is Israel, which actually does have clandestine nuclear weapons and has threatened to use them in different contexts in different points in time. And I just don't think a country that isn't part of the non-proliferation treaty, that refuses to acknowledge its nuclear arsenal, that stole our nuclear secrets and enriched uranium. Ben Shapiro would know a thing or two about that, right, Benny boy? You would know a thing or two about that, Ben. Yeah. Okay, that country is a threat. So it's rich to hear from an internationally wanted war criminal like Netanyahu about which countries can and can't have nuclear weapons. So it's very likely that Netanyahu intends to convince Trump that his original plan to escalate the war against Iran, against Iran was the right decision to make, even as the war-related chaos spreads to the Red Sea, with the Houthis basically fighting off the transit of Saudi vessels, and now the Caspian Sea, with Ukraine now attacking Iranian vessels, which apparently there's a portion of our audience that thinks is totally fantastic. We'll see how fantastic it is if Ukraine decides, no, we're gonna go to war with Iran. How are they gonna fight Iran and Russia at the same time? And are they planning on the United States backing them to help them win those wars when we haven't been able to win in this war against Iran? This is so unbelievably stupid. But okay, let me keep going. Before Trump decided to take a pause in the bombings, he seemed to be leaning toward approving an initial phase of a multi-stage bombing campaign. The campaign would counter coastal radars, anti-ship missile launchers, and a fleet of small Iranian attack boats and other sites that the Pentagon says have contributed to attacks on commercial ships transiting the strait. I just want to be clear about something. While Netanyahu is still talking about we must topple the regime, Trump is so past that because it's not going to happen. At this point, Trump is just fighting to get back to where we were before the war, where we were on February 27th when the Strait of Hormuz was open and free for all transit, without any tolls, without any safety or security concerns. Our decision to go to war with Iran on behalf of Israel has been devastating for the global economy and devastating when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. So at this point, all Trump is trying to do, and what he's failing at, is to get the Strait of Hormuz open. And here's the thing, he's not going to be able to do that through a military operation. There is no military option for that. We've been over this over and over again. The only thing that he can turn to is a negotiated agreement, but Trump is incapable of doing something like that because it would require him to admit to himself and to the American people that we lost this war. And it's not a reflection of our service members, it's a reflection of this administration, how corrupt our government is, and how corrupt our Pentagon is, really. So, the Pentagon also happened to rush more forces, weaponry, and supplies to the Middle East in recent days to prepare for any escalation. But now it looks like that escalation is on hold. And I'm not dumb enough to think that it's over. Trump realizes we've depleted our military assets, and as a result, maybe we should just call it a day and walk away. I think that this war will continue. And who knows what Trump has up his sleeve moving forward. But for now, it seems like he has been persuaded, rightfully, about how dangerous it is to continue the war and, in fact, to escalate this war against Iran, knowing what the depletion of our military assets really looks like. By the way, Trump was also planning to hit more civilian infrastructure, Iran's energy facilities, and Pickaxe Mountain. Can we maybe not strike energy facilities? I mean, if you're really concerned about the price of gas or the energy crisis right now, maybe don't strike any energy facilities, but he can't help himself. Last Thursday, the president told Axios, quote, "I am considering a massive attack, bigger than ever before. I am close to making a decision. We are all set for it." Now, he had a change of heart literally later that same day when his advisors told him that our dwindling stockpiles would make it impossible to defend our allies and our service members in the region when Iran inevitably retaliates, because that's what they've been doing, not just against the US and our military bases, but also against our Gulf allies, which host our military bases or allow for the United States to carry out strikes against Iran from their countries. Now, the reality of our depleted stockpiles was serious all the way back in April. Like, this isn't new information. Back in April, the New York Times reported that the Pentagon had used more than 1,200 Patriot interceptor missiles in the war at more than $4 million apiece, leaving inventories worrisomely low. Okay, so very, very low, according to internal Defense Department estimates and congressional officials. So I don't know why he didn't make a better decision all the way back in April when this information was already readily available to him. But Iran, again, still has or maintains 70% of their missiles. And the situation for the US has worsened since then, military officials said this week. Now, finally, just want to provide a word on the Hormuz Strait. I'm sorry, not the Hormuz Strait, my bad. The Red Sea blockade. This war has not played out well for the United States. It did not play out well for the global community. And not only are we dealing with the situation in which the Hormuz Strait is closed, we're also dealing with a situation in which Saudi vessels are dealing with a blockade carried out by Ansar Allah, otherwise known as the Houthis. But they have other tricks up their sleeves as well, because there's the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, and Ansar Allah is threatening to blockade that strait as well. So I think it would be best to maybe de-escalate tensions and find a way to get out of this war, pursue diplomacy, and more importantly, stop listening to the Israelis. That's critical. But something tells me that's not going to happen, especially with Netanyahu showing up for yet another visit in the Oval Office.
Every time.
What you're seeing in this video is the destruction or damage to one of the most important oil facilities in the world, which is the Jazan oil facility for Saudi Aramco. This video could not have been possible without the failure of America's missile defense system in the Middle East, hinged especially around the Patriot missile battery system, which makes up an important node in a broader network called the Middle East Air Defense, or MEAD, that the US set up at great cost throughout the region to protect critical infrastructure like this and to deter and suppress attacks by Iran and groups like Ansar Allah, which appear to have launched this attack in Saudi Arabia just this week. The failure of the Patriot missile battery to protect the facility, it comes in the context of a broader war in the region that has seen radars and batteries struck by Iranian missiles and drones, and is now witnessing the entrance of Ansarallah into the conflict in a new variable, which is very, very likely to add further strain to the system, but also trigger a global economic collapse. Because when you look at this video, you're not just seeing the destruction of vital infrastructure, you're seeing the prelude to a shutdown of not just the Strait of Hormuz, but also the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea passage, which has been the basically escape hatch for oil and gas, which is shut in the region during the war. The Houthis have also said that they've shut down shipping, Saudi shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb. They've hit a few ships. And now with this attack on Aramco, they're signaling that the war is going to expand much, much more. And America's much vaunted Patriot missile batteries seem to have no real way of stopping this or suppressing these attacks as they were intended to. We're going to talk a bit more about the broader context of the war as it's evolving at the moment. But I want to talk specifically about this Patriot missile system, its importance, and what its current failures will mean for the ongoing war. Samad, can you tell us a bit about the importance of the Patriot missile battery in America's broader missile defense system in the region, and also explain its failures and what the current failure to protect U.S. bases and infrastructure around the Middle East will mean for the ongoing course of the war?
Thank you, Murtaza. Look, the U.S. has failed. The U.S. Patriot air defense system has failed to counter Iranian missiles. It's because Iran had a plan, an old plan, to systematically take down U.S. air defense in the Middle East, layer by layer, and they're executing it to a good enough level, to an excellent level, one could argue. From the other side of it, U.S. is making terrible decisions, right from the very top. From the Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, the strategy they're setting is not conducive to a successful military operation in the Middle East, and we're seeing it. So let me break it down a bit, and let me break it down by focusing on what the US is doing wrong, and then I'll go into what Iran is doing right. The first thing the US is doing wrong is that it's not involving Israel in these military operations. And I'm talking purely from a capability perspective. The Israeli army is more capable, it's more professional, it's more it's more orientated to fighting Iran than the US is. So the US is lacking Israeli capabilities, whether they be drones flying over Iran, shooting down missile launchers or drones, or threatening them so that they don't have time to attack. The US is lacking Israeli intelligence. Israeli intelligence on the ground in Iran is much more expansive than American intelligence. And it's lacking Israeli capabilities, capable Air Force. The Air Force knows how to fly into Iran, knows how to attack, and just the threat and the presence of them there. The Israelis right now are happy to let the US take all the damage, to let US service lives be lost, and to let the US pay for this operation while they can sit back and enjoy Iran being attacked and Iran being degraded. For them, this is the perfect scenario. From the US's planning perspectives, not dragging Israel into this the same way Israel dragged them into this means that they're less capable to threaten and attack Iran. And that's shown in the fact that Iran's able to degrade the systems. The other thing is, in this is another, Murtaza, you're going to go into this later, but I'll be brief about it. The US doesn't want to take casualties. So if you look at where all the attacks are, they're just surrounding coastal cities. And Iran's drones and missiles ranges is much more than that. So they're firing more inland. They're firing with no threat overhead. They are taking their time, bringing their missiles out, taking out their drones, setting the targets perfectly, and launching. This wasn't the case during the war, the previous wars, where there was always a consistent threat, whether it be an Israeli drone, an American drone, Israeli jet, an American jet, or local intelligence that is collaborating with Israel and the US. That's no longer there. The US is not wanting to take casualties. That means Iran can basically take free pops at the US's military, the US's air defense system in the Middle East. The other key decision they made is no THAAD. The THAAD air defense system is way more sophisticated than the Patriot air defense system, but they're not using it. The missiles are 3 times more expensive. You're looking at $12 million for a THAAD missile interceptor and about $4 million for a Patriot. It can shoot down missiles that the Patriot can't. And these systems are designed to work together so they can split the load. Now you're taking out your most sophisticated and your most capable system. Even though US military personnel are dying, the decision's been made from the high end that they're not worth protecting to that degree. And one should note that the US used up more than, I think, half of their THAAD interceptors, roughly defending Israel, really defending Israeli interests. That's dragged them into this war. But now when it comes to American interests in the Middle East or American allies that are not Israel in the Middle East, they're not willing to use this, and it shows the level of depletion. Now, like, let's switch to the Iranian side. There's this like perception, there's this kind of running joke about Netanyahu, how he's always pushed US American presidents to attack Iran because Iran is kind of going to get the bomb. Now, whether that's true or not, what Netanyahu was right about is Iran has developed incredible military power over the past 30 years in an exponential way. Now, if Israel and the US attacked Iran 5 years ago, I think 50% of Iranian capacity you see, or like a good chunk of Iranian capacity that you see, just doesn't exist. They're missiles that can go as far as they can go, the number of missiles they have, their terminal guidance seeking system, their MAF systems, their MERV systems, their cyber attacks, their drones, a lot of that is developing in an exponential capacity. Now, forget 5 years ago, 10 years ago, Iran doesn't have a lot of these. Like if you go back 15 years ago, I think Iran was just about developing missiles that can reach Israel and Jordan. But now, all this time later, Iran's military capacity is significant, and they consistently look to undermine it. To underestimate it consistently. And it does come back from propaganda, because a lot of propaganda around Iran is how incapable they are, how feeble they are, how comical they are, when in actual fact, you have a very strong industrial and a very strong military industrial base. You have a country where they prioritize engineering and their sciences, and they've developed incredibly sophisticated missiles in this space, and they're able to use them now, and they are using them now to execute this strategy, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Now, not only is the weaponry becoming advanced or is advanced, but because there's no threat to their missile force and to their drone forces, Iran's able to launch way more complicated attacks than during the wars. During the wars, you had to kind of bring out your weapons, you have to attack. There was little communication between like different missile cities or different drone operators, because you were operating in warlike conditions. There were drones, there was everything. You just basically had to, like, within your own capacity, launch what you can, and you have your instructions and you go. But now there's no threat. Now communication is open. Now, like, internet is open. They're able to coordinate very sophisticated attacks, which the Wall Street Journal is finally starting to report on. Now, these sophisticated attacks are able to penetrate this air defense system, and probably if the THAAD system was on, they will also be able to penetrate it. Now, one of the key components, and like you can see the footage here now, one of the key components of Iran's current strategy is they're actually targeting the air defense system. And not only are they targeting it, we have at least 2 examples here where they hit it, or they hit very close, where there's splash damage that could have damaged the system. Now, okay, cool, like, there's a lot of these systems and there's a lot of components to it, but this is not something disposable. It's not like the MQ-9, the drones that they keep losing every time they operate them over Iran. And even those are not disposable, but they use them in a pretty disposable way. Just the threat of these systems being under attack just means that you have to pull them back. You have to decide, you have to keep them in a safer way. You have to operate them in a more limited capacity, which means more missiles are coming through and more missiles are attacking. And not only that, it's like, if you look at some of America's like best assets or most expensive assets, like their planes, like we have examples here, open source examples of this MQ-4 drone, which is one of the most important surveillance drones in the Middle East, or in this theater of war. Initially, this was operating from Middle Eastern bases, but now, because Iran managed to attack it, and potentially there's rumors that they managed to destroy one of them, and these are very rare, very expensive. If I'm not mistaken, $250 million. Now look at this map. They're flying it out from Italy. So when they're flying it out from Italy and they have to fly it back to Italy to keep it safe, the operational capacity in the Middle East is being degraded by Iran's sophisticated layered strategy to just take it down step by step by step. And then the last aspect of why these Patriot defense systems are failing is purely because of depletion. The New York Times a few months ago came out and said the US only has about 1,000 of these Patriot missiles, interceptor missiles left. For the first time in 30 years, it came out this week that the US Army is actually putting orders for PAC-2 missiles for the first time in 30 years. It shows the depletion levels. And when you're looking at videos like this, you're looking at like Middle East allies of the States launching so many Patriot air defense systems, missiles, interceptors against 1 or 2 Iranian missiles. This is not sustainable. This is a not sustainable way to use it, and it's going to be depleted because they're going to be ordering. You can see how Ukraine is suffering now because they're not getting this missile interceptors, and you can see that the Americans are they're run out of the system or they're looking to preserve it. So from that perspective, this is why these are the reasons why this Patriot air defense system is failing. And as the days or weeks go by, they could actually completely fail, and Iran could just attack at will. Now, perhaps we're recording this on Saturday, 10 o'clock local time, Iran. Yesterday was the first day we never had the attack on Iran, and so far, when I checked the news about 15 minutes ago, there was an attack. Maybe this is why Trump is asking for another ceasefire from Iran. But Murtaza, off camera, you said something very interesting about how this specific strategy from Donald Trump, which he thinks is genius, is actually the perfect way that Iran wants to fight the US.
Well, from the Iranian perspective, they're obviously facing the world's superpower, preeminent superpower, and 2 nuclear powers, in fact, in this conflict, more or less alone, with the support of some non-state actors. And on top of that, the other Gulf Arab countries around it and Jordan are essentially aligned with Israel and the United States. They're giving their territory staging grounds for attacks against Iran. And these attacks that Iran's carrying out, you're referring to, they're hitting these bases, US bases and infrastructure and batteries in these countries. So from the Iranian perspective, it's a very stark situation in terms of odds and the power differential. And they're fighting back and they're resisting quite effectively in the eyes of many observers. But it's still a difficult scenario. So when you're in a situation like this, you're the smaller power relatively to your adversaries. You need to fight an attritional war. You cannot fight a war which is settled in a very short period of time, a shock and awe type campaign, which the US waged against Iran in the early days of the war alongside Israel. You need to survive the blows that you take, especially during those periods of intense American and Israeli activity, and then bleed out the conflict over a very long period of time. And so from the Iranian perspective, the current pace where the U.S. is carrying out periodic standoff munition strikes in southern Iran, it's carrying out a long-range air campaign and so forth. That's painful in many ways. It's having impacts on people, especially in the south of the country. But Iran, at the same time, is retaliating very hard by hitting these U.S. bases in the Gulf. And as you mentioned, the missile defenses to protect those bases have been depleted or destroyed in some cases. And they're destroying these bases such that it will reduce the effectiveness and intensity of any subsequent American air campaign over time. The way that these campaigns work is that, the longer it goes on, the more it starts to favor the defender if the defender is able to destroy this basing network that surrounds it. So, all these airfields and so forth and military bases, like, for instance, Muwaffaq al-Salti in Jordan, which is a major staging hub for the war, including the initial February 28th attacks, that's been rendered unsafe by Iranian attacks. And even today, we saw new satellite footage. We can share some images of showing subsequent Iranian attacks on those facilities in Jordan, as well as other facilities which are very important to the U.S. military in Bahrain. So you can't really use these anymore for more attacks against Iran because either they've been wrecked or they're just unsafe for have soldiers there. So I think that this is kind of favorable to Iran in a very strong way because it just means that whatever blow America lands against Iran in the future, it'll become weaker and weaker because they won't have the ability to generate a high rate of missions and sorties against Iran the way that they did very, very intensely from about February 28th to March 21st of this year. So their debasification strategy, which is the word that one very succinct analyst used for the situation, is kind of proceeding at pace. They're dismantling this basic network that the U.S. built over many, many years at great expense throughout the Middle East. And that was intentionally intended to contain Iran and be used as a staging ground to attack Iran potentially. That's all being put to the side now. It's being, cast into oblivion. And one other way you can look at this is that Iran is not striking Israel at the moment. And it seems to be wise, because if you have the opportunity to do so, of course, if you're in a war with many different parties, you'd like to fight them individually instead of all at the same time and give them an advantage. But another way of looking at it is that they're basically clearing a path through these destroyed bases, through these destroyed interceptors and radars to Israel. Jordan is basically the last domino before you can start firing ballistic missiles at Israel with far greater effectiveness than Iran did earlier in the war, because they won't be American and Jordanian assets to the same degree, shooting down drones, shooting down missiles, and giving early warning to Israel before those missiles and drones arrive. So this all kind of weds into, it all ties together. So yeah, as best, it's not to say that this war is easy for Iran by any means. No, it's extremely painful in many ways. But this is the preferable way to fight if you're in their position. And the way that they have the situation right now, I think it's almost optimal given the cards that they have, because not only is the war just resulting in this mass destruction of sensitive and very hard to replace infrastructure in the region, it's adding on to the economic costs and the political costs for the United States. They're waging a full spectrum war where all those aspects are coming into play, because unlike in March, global oil reserves are already cut to the bone. And if the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked for a long time, the shortages will appear and price increases will be much more stark. But also, as we talked about earlier, the Bab al-Mandeb, that card has now been played. So there's really no out of the situation now. The Iranians have thrown down the gauntlet in a tremendous fashion. And it's really up to Trump now to see how he responds, and if he can respond effectively and find some way of reopening both these waterways and suppressing Iranian missile fire or forcing them to capitulate. I don't see an obvious way he can do that, to be honest with you. And I think that the MOU was really a wise way to try to get out of this. Now we're in a situation where both sides will suffer, but I do believe that the longer it goes on, strategically more benefits will accrue to Iran. And if they seek a goal of expelling the U.S. from the Middle East, the war will take them further down that path and maybe right to the end of it.
Exactly, Murtaza. Iran is able to carry out its strategic objectives while taking minimal relative damage for what it's willing to pay. So this is a perfect situation for Iran, or as perfect as could be in warlike scenarios. Thank you. This has been...
Go feel. Follow me.